The Old Fox Deceiv'd by Martha Grimes. She came out of the fog, her face painted half white, half black, walking down Grape Lane. It was early January, and the sea roke drove in from the east, turning the cobbled street into a smoky tunnel that curved down to the water. The bay was open to the full force of gales, and the scythe-like curve of Grape Lane acted as a conduit for winds from the sea. Far off, the fog siren known as the Whitby Bull gave its 4 mournful blasts. The wind billowed her black cape, which settled again around her ankles in an eddying wave. She wore a white satin shirt and white satin trousers stuffed into high-heeled black boots. The click of the heels on the wet stones was the only sound except for the dry caw-caw of the gulls. One strutted on a ledge above her, pecking at the windows. To avoid the wind, she clung to the fronts of the tiny houses. She looked up alleyways that seemed to end in cul-de-sacs, but from which steps like hidden springs curled down to other passages. The narrow street came right up to the cottage doors and black iron boot scrapers. She stopped for a moment beneath the dim street lamp, when someone passed her on the other side of the lane, but in this fog no one was recognizable. She could see the pub at the end of the lane by the breakwater, its windows glowing mistily like opals in the dark. When she came to the iron gates of the Angel Steps, she stopped. The wide stair was on her left, and connected Grape Lane and Scroop Street above with Our Lady of the Vale, the church, at the top of the village. She unlatched the gates and walked up, a long walk, to a small landing where a bench served as a resting place. Someone was sitting there. The woman in black and white took a step back and down, startled. She opened her mouth to speak. The figure had risen, 2 arms coming out suddenly as if jerked by strings, out, up, and down. Struck again and again, the woman finally fell like a puppet and was kept from rolling down the steps only because the other one grabbed at her cape. Her body lay collapsed, sprawling, head down the steps. The other person turned and walked over her, almost casually, and walked down the Angel Steps back to Grape Lane, keeping close to the wall so as not to step in the blood. It was 12th night. Adrian Rees slammed his glass on the bar.
Certain kinds of people have always got away with murder.
He had been extolling the virtues of Russian literature and Raskolnikov. No one at the Old Fox Deceiv'd was especially interested. Adrian tapped his empty glass with his finger.
Another, Kitty, me love. Don't Kitty, me love me, and you'll not be getting another till I see your money.
Kitty Meacham wiped the counter where he'd banged the mug.
Drunk as a lord.
Drunk, is it?
Ah, Kitty, me girl. You'd not even stand one of your own countrymen? Ha! And you're no more Irish than me ginger cat.
The cat in question was curled up on a scrap of rug before the blazing hearth.
Looks lazy enough to be Irish, said Adrian.
Would you listen to the man? Him who spends his days dabbing and daubing and painting women without a stitch on. That cat does more an honest day's work than many I know.
Adrian leaned across the counter.
Kitty, I'll tell all Rackmore you posed for me in the nude.
Titters to the left, giggles to the right, from Billy Sims and Corky Fishpool. Imperturbable and rock-like, Kitty merely kept swabbing down the bar.
I'll have none of your dirty paintings, and none of your dirty mouth, but only your dirty money. Or will I be seeing any this night at all?
Adrian looked hopefully from Billy to Corky, both of whom immediately struck up fresh conversation with those beside them. No buyers. Not for his paintings either, which is why he had no money.
You should be worrying about the state of your souls, not your purses. Guilt, redemption, sin, that's what it's all about.
And don't you go wheedling money out of Bertie,
said Kitty, as if she hadn't heard a word about sin, guilt, or Raskolnikov.
I seen you do that only this last week. Shameful it is. A grown man getting beer money from a wee bairn, a poor, poor, motherless lad.
Bertie? A poor, poor, motherless lad. Christ, he charges more interest than the banks. I think Arnold keeps the books.
Even behind those thick glasses, the kid had eyes like rivets. He'd have a confession out of Raskolnikov inside of 2 minutes.
And you needn't go saying nasty things about Arnold, neither. I've seen Arnold walk down wee paths along these cliffs, no wider than a wee snake, while you can't even walk a straight line up to the high.
Adrian's eye fell on Percy Blythe's glass of bitter. Percy Blythe's sharp little eyes screwed up, and he put his 2 hands quickly over the glass.
Philistines, you none of you understand sin and guilt. That and 50 pence will buy you a pint, said Kitty. Time, gentlemen, please.
The door slapped shut behind him, and Adrian buckled up the oilskin over his blue guernsey and pulled his knitted cap down over his ears. January in Rackmoor was hell. The Old Fox Deceiv'd was so near the water that waves once washed its outer walls. The front of the pub faced the little cove where tiny boats slapped about in the water. 4 narrow streets converged here: Lead Street, the High, Grape Lane, and Winkle Alley. It was on the High that Adrian lived. He decided to walk along Grape Lane, though. It was not quite so steep, and there were fewer booby traps of broken cobbles. He heard her before he saw her. Just as he was passing the Angel Steps, he heard the tiny hammer taps of the high heels. She came out of the fog on the other side of Grape Lane, walking towards the Angel Steps and the sea. The wind whipped her black cape around her white trousers. Adrian thought he was proof against any odd sight in Rackmoor, yet he shrank back a bit against the cold stone of a cottage. For the barest moment, she stopped in the arc of one of the few lamps, and he took her in. When Adrian wanted to remember something, the scattered pattern of coloured leaves, the lay of the moonlight, the fold of velvet across an arm, he didn't have to look twice. The shutter of his eye snapped it, fixed it in his memory, filed it for future reference. He had always thought he would make one hell of a police witness. In those few moments beneath the lamp, she was painted in his memory. The black cape, white satin shirt and pants, black boots, black cap on her head, but it was the face that was memorable. As if a line had been drawn absolutely evenly down the bridge of her nose, the left side was painted white, the right side black, and a small black mask completed the weird checkerboard look. She walked on quickly toward the Angel Steps and the sea, the high heels drumming back into the fog. He stood, staring into nothing for a few seconds. Then he remembered. It was 12th night. Bertie Makepeace held the stoneware teapot aloft.
Shall I be mother?
It was very late to be making tea, but with no school tomorrow, Bertie felt he could indulge himself. He was wearing an apron much too large, so he had secured it with the tie running round his chest and under his arms. Now he stood with teapot poised over cup and waited patiently for Arnold's answer. None was forthcoming from the occupant of the other chair. One might have felt, though, looking into Arnold's earnest eyes, that his failure to respond was not because he was a dog, but because, no, he really did not want to be mother. Arnold was a Staffordshire Terrier, the colour of a Yorkshire pudding or a fine, dry sherry. The unnervingly steady look of his dark eyes might have made one think he was not a dog at all, but someone doing an impersonation, zipped up in a dog suit. He was a quiet dog. Seldom did he bark. Bertie slid off his chair and padded over to the window.
Did you hear something, Arnold?
Arnold had nearly finished the milk in his bowl, laced with a bit of tea, and sat up, ears pricked. The Makepeace cottage was near the Angel Steps. Looking out and down, Bertie could see nothing through the fog, except the ghostly outlines of peaked roofs and chimney pots below. There was a tapping above him on the window of his bedroom. Bertie jumped. A herring gull, maybe, or a fulmar. They were always doing that, waking him in the morning sometimes, coming like visitors to knock at the door. Arnold was standing behind him, waiting to go out.
Well, up it then, Arnold. Mind you back soon.
The dog stopped and looked back at Bertie. Probably he understood. Bertie stood there a while, looking out at the moving mist. What he had heard had sounded like a scream. The birds were always screaming. One scream sounded pretty much like another in Rackmore. It was the wakeman, Billy Sims, who found her. Billy Sims had continued his evening rounds long after the closing of the Fox, visiting first one crony, then another in Lead Street and Winkle Alley. Now he decided to gain his own small cottage in Salter's Lane, beside Our Lady, by walking up the Angel Steps, although he knew they were unlit and unsafe in the winter darkness. He weaved his way upwards. His foot struck something unyielding and yet soft, not stone. He had no torch, but he did have matches. He struck one. The match spurted up, and he saw the upside-down and blood-covered face, the limbs going off in impossible directions, making the black-and-white figure look like a huge doll. Billy Sims nearly took a dive down the steps. When he remembered that it was 12th night, and that this was but some mummer who had strayed from a party, it only served to turn the nightmare real. Detective Inspector Ian Harkins, of the Pitlochry CID, got up from where he had been kneeling and adjusted the coat around his shoulders. He had removed his beautiful butter-leather gloves to examine the body. He drew them on again, like a surgeon. From the station in Pitlochry, a town 5 times the size of Rackmore, but still with only a small police force, Inspector Harkins had called in 6 men, including a local doctor and the constable scratching down notes behind him. The scene of crimes man had already been and gone. Harkins shoved a thin, hand-rolled Cuban cigar back in his mouth. "Well?" The pathologist got up, grunted, wiped his hands. "I don't know. Looks like somebody took a pitchfork to her. A rather unwieldy weapon, Doctor. Try again." "Ice pick. All. God knows. She looks like a sieve. But the ice pick's out because it looks like whatever it was had more than one prong. I can tell better when I have the body back at the morgue." Harkins turned to Constable Derek Smithies. "Her name was Temple, you said?" Smithies tried to make himself small, difficult for a big man. "Yes, sir. They tell me she was staying at the Fox Deceiv'd, the pub down by the sea wall." "Stranger to town?" "I suppose so." "You suppose so. Well, what's a stranger doing in that weird get-up? Does Rackmore often get such visitors?" "It's a costume, sir, because of 12th night. There was a costume party over the old house. She must have been going to it or coming back." "Where the hell's the old house, Constable?" Smithies pointed up the Angel Steps, jabbing his finger as if to make it past the church. "If you're from these parts, you must know it, sir. That's the Old Fox Deceiv'd manor house." "I thought you just said that was the name of the pub." "It is, sir. Only the pub half belongs to the Colonel, and he named it after the house. So we just call one the Old House, and the other the Fox, to keep them straight. The Colonel, Colonel Crail, he's that crazy over fox hunting." "Wait a minute. Are you talking about Sir Titus Crail? That Colonel Crail?" "That's him, sir." "You mean she was a guest of his?" "I guess so, sir." Inspector Harkins had little respect for his superiors, whether in Pitlochry, Leeds, or London. He certainly had no respect for his inferiors, assuming they were down there, because that's where they deserved to be. But one thing he did respect: privilege. The Crails had as much as anyone in Yorkshire. Melrose Plant rested his paper on his knee. Lady Agatha Ardrey was separated from her nephew by a splotch of Axminster carpet and tiered cake plate. She had been sitting for the last hour like a baby whale on the Queen Anne couch, shoving in fairy cakes and brandy snaps and calling it her 11s. She was stripping another fairy cake of its little paper coverlet.
"You say and do the oddest things, Melrose. Now, here you are thinking of going off to some rubbishy little fishing village by the sea."
"Fishing villages generally are." He remembered she had called it a quaint little fishing village before she discovered the invitation did not include her. Agatha shuddered.
"The North Sea, and in dead winter."
Melrose yawned and turned another page of the York Mail. "Well, there it is, then."
"I still do not understand why you're even thinking of going."
Because I've been invited, dear aunt, which is why one ordinarily goes places. Of course, the arrow fell wide. Agatha had invited herself to her friend Teddy's when she found Melrose was motoring to Yorkshire. Well, he could hardly refuse to take her as far as York. It was straight on his way. Nor did he truly mind the stopover, for York was a wonderful place. Melrose roused himself from his reflections on the walls and gates around the city. "What did you say, aunt?" "The Sir Titus Crail. He's only a baronet, whereas I am only a commoner. There are lots of us. We're popping up all over Britain. I heard, though it might be mere rumour, we have London surrounded and have already captured the whole of Cornwall." He snapped his newspaper. "Oh, do stop being silly, Melrose. You know exactly what I mean. No one will let you off with just being plain Melrose Plant, instead of the Earl of Cavernous, I mean, and 12th Viscount Ardry, and grandson of... I'm afraid they will have to let me off, aunt, since I've let myself off. Funny how the old world keeps turning without my title. I still don't see why you pretend to give it up. You're not political. Your father might have been, but you're not. You're not running for anything." Only the door. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling, thinking of his father, whom he had very much loved and admired, except for all that hunting tomfoolery. It was the hunting, he supposed, which had made him such a friend of Titus Crail, whom Melrose hadn't seen in 30 years. His only memory of Sir Titus was of that day Melrose had gone cubbing, and of a tall, imposing figure standing next to him, the dead fox in his hands. They were going through that ghastly initiation, the ritual of blooding. Melrose found his 10-year-old face being wiped with the blood of the fox. Hunting had never appealed to him after that. Agatha interrupted his reverie once again. "Quite a decent old house, this. Bring a lot on today's market, I should think." Melrose did not answer. Riveted on an item on the front page of the York Mail. There was a murder in Rackmoor. According to the account, a body of a woman clad in some sort of mummer's costume had been found sprawled in a backwater street. Murdered woman, supposedly a relative of Sir Titus Crail, MP and MFH, one of Yorkshire's wealthy and most influential citizens. A relation of Sir Titus. Now Melrose found himself in a real quandary. To be barging in at this bleak hour of the Crails' lives, invited or not. Perhaps he should just pack up and go back to Northants and send his apologies. Agatha snapped. "What's the matter with you, Melrose? You're sitting there all white as death." Fortunately, he was saved from comment by the entrance of Miles, Teddy's butler, to whom Agatha said, "I'd like some more tea, and 1 or 2 of those brandy snaps, but do ask cook to see the cream's fresher. Just tell her to whip up some more." Miles looked at her out of bullet-proof eyes. Agatha always managed to depopularize herself with servants very quickly. "Yes, madam." In warmer tones, he addressed Melrose. "And you, my lord, is there anything you'd be requiring?" "The telephone. I mean, would you mind ringing up this number for me and seeing if this party is there?" He tore a leaf from his memorandum book and handed it to the butler. "Certainly, my lord." "Who are you calling, Melrose?" "Spirits from the vasty deep." If she knew a murder had been done in the very place to which he was going, she'd be right beside him, tramping along and stamping out whatever poor clues there were. Agatha fancied herself a mystery writer. The butler swanned into the room. "I've got—" He took a quick look at Agatha, and then turned to Melrose. "Your party on the line." "Thank you. I'll just take it in the other room." Butlers were amazing. Melrose thought of his own butler, Riven. They could read minds, even where there were no minds to read. He looked at Agatha and left the room. Yes, certainly, Sir Titus was still wanting Melrose to come, perhaps more now than ever. Police all over the house, all over Rackmoor. There was even talk about calling in Scotland Yard. Titus Crail laughed, but without much conviction. The way they were questioning Julian, you'd have thought he was, well, a suspect. "Look, dear boy, you might be some help, you know. I'm a bit worried."
About what, Sir Titus? I don't know, to tell the truth. It's all very confusing. She was... well, we'll talk when you get here.
Melrose tried to remember Julian Crail, but couldn't. He didn't think they had ever met, not even as children, but he agreed to come as planned, and to be of what help he could. Detective Chief Inspector Richard Jury was awakened from a dream by the rude ringing of his telephone. Sleepily, he lifted the receiver. Oiled with sarcasm, the voice of Superintendent Racer slipped over the wire.
It's gone 1, and you're still getting your beauty sleep, Jury?
Jury yawned. It was no use reminding his chief superintendent that Jury had had next to no sleep in the last 48 hours.
You wanted something, sir? No, Jury. I didn't really want anything. I called for a bit of a natter. The Yorkshire police called in. They want someone up there, pronto. Village called Rackmoor. Fishing village on the North Sea.
Racer said this with evident delight. Jury shut his eyes. Last year it had been Northamptonshire. That was wintry enough. He had nothing against Yorkshire in the spring, Yorkshire in summer, Yorkshire in autumn, but not January. The receiver squawked. His eyes snapped open. He must have dozed off. Yes, sir?
I said, get down to the office. Make it snappy. There's been a murder up there and they want us. Wiggins can fill you in.
When did it happen?
2 days ago. Nights, that is.
Jury groaned. That means they've moved the body.
That means... Stop whining, Jury. A policeman's life is full of grief.
Detective Sergeant Alfred Wiggins took out a small tablecloth of a handkerchief and blew his nose.
Rackmoor's on the coast. Fishing village, or was once, near Whitby. More of a tourist place now, in summer at least.
Wiggins tossed his head back and applied drops with a tiny dropper, sniffing hugely after each application. He had managed to turn hypochondria into an art, or even a sport.
Can't the Yorkshire people handle this murder, Wiggins? They're no fools.
That's why it's just the mirror.
Jury had, over the years, learnt to interpret Sergeant Wiggins' secret language of the sick room. He so often had a cloth to his face, or a lozenge in his mouth, his messages were runic.
What do you mean, not just the murder?
Wiggins tilted his head forward to hurry the draining process.
There's complications, they say. The victim, name of Gemma Temple, according to someone in Rackmoor, was actually somebody else.
Wiggins, do you think you could explain that?
Yes, sir. What they meant was, there's some question about who the woman actually is. She'd been in Rackmoor only 4 days, staying at a pub. Said her name was Gemma Temple. But according to this family name, Crail, she was really some relation of theirs.
Wiggins flipped through his notes.
Dilys March, that was the name the Crails gave her. Did a moonlight flit, 15 years ago, and then just resurfaced and got herself murdered.
Well, surely this Temple woman can be traced. Wiggins shook his head.
The Yorkshire police know she came from London, sir. Kentish Town was her last address. I don't know much more than that.
Suspects?
Nothing much said there, except some crazy painter type was mouthing off about murder in the pub on the same night, saying something about Rasputin. Talked about superior types doing murder.
Rasputin?
Some Russian or other.
Jury thought a moment. Raskolnikov?
They all sound alike, those Russians.
Jury checked his watch. Have you got us a train?
Yes, sir. Not till 5 from King's Cross, I'm afraid. We'll be met in York.
The car heater of the little Ford Escort thunked despairingly, blasting out heat on the floor, but nowhere else, so that Jury's feet were hot and his nose cold. The North York moors stretched endlessly to the right and left, white and frozen. Far off, the horizon loomed in near translucent shades of grey. Jury and Wiggins had passed some dry walls, but mostly the land was unenclosed and uncultivated waste. No roads nor railways, no farms, no hedges, no walls nor steadings. The moors stretched away like another country. Jury and Wiggins were now crossing Fylingdale's Moor, where the geodesic domes of the U.S. Navy's early warning system rose incongruously in the distance. Coming towards the car, straggling along the side of the road, were a half-dozen moor-jocks, the black-faced sheep of the moors. Thick rolls of curly wool scaled with frost, all supported by spindly black legs. They had long, black, and Jury thought, sad faces. As the car passed the sheep, Jury wound down the window. The last in line had stopped to scratch itself against an ancient cross and looked curiously after the car. A plaintive wail came from Wiggins, who was doing the driving.
"My God, sir, close that window, will you?"
Jury rolled up the window and settled back and stared out at the desolate, forsaken landscape, the untrammelled expanses of snow, and he sighed. Rackmoor lay in the hollowed-out cleft of the rocks, the North Sea beyond and the moors behind. It looked secretive, almost guilty. Jury looked down at the sea and the red-tiled roofs huddled in uneven tiers along the cliffside. The village was smoky with fog and morning fires, monochromatic, except for the dull red-brown of the rooftops. The sign of the Old Fox Deceiv'd swung from iron, whipped by a sharp wind. It showed a fox, looking a bit battered from too many chases, but now lolling by bushes in the filtered sunlight, eating grapes. Peering out on the poor, unfortunate creature from bushes and trees were hounds, probably a whole pack of them. Jury and Wiggins walked around the cove and up to the pub. Mrs. Meacham, "Kitty," she said to Jury, looking wonderingly up at him, either at his height, his smile, his identity card, or all three, led them back to a small dining room to the rear of the pub. A slim, youngish man rose from the table. Considering he was here, he had to be Detective Ian Harkins of the Pitlochry CID. Jury noticed that Harkins had not removed his incredibly expensive camel's hair coat. Harkins appeared to be rather unwilling to stay a moment longer than duty absolutely warranted. He handed over a manila folder, labelled and very neat. The folder just missed being tossed on the table by a hair. "It's all there, Chief Inspector. It's a question of identity. According to Colonel Crail, Sir Titus, but he likes to be called Colonel, Gemma Temple, or at least the woman calling herself Gemma Temple, actually claimed to be Dilys March, who disappeared 15 years ago when she was 18 or 19, hasn't been seen since, unless it's now. Dilys March was the Crail's ward." Jury looked puzzled. "Claimed? Couldn't Crail tell for certain?" "Colonel Crail thought she was the March girl, but his son Julian says no. I should think it would be easy to establish, but it's not proving so. We got her roommate up here from London, name's Josie Thwaite, identified the body as Gemma Temple, but didn't know damn all about her." Jury shook his head. "Why did the March girl leave? What happened?" "Just got in her car and took off." That wasn't much of an answer, but Jury imagined it was the best he'd get. "How did the Temple woman get here? Car?" Harkins nodded, touched a match to another of his Cuban cigars. "Her roommates, Josie Thwaites. We went over it. Didn't tell us anything." "I take it Gemma Temple looked like Dilys March." "Obviously. Allowing for the changes of 15 years, she was a ringer." Harkins opened the folder, detached a small photo, and dropped it on the table, wordlessly. Jury examined it. The snapshot showed a very pretty girl, leaning, posing, really, against a stone wall. Dark, straight hair, chin-length, and curling slightly under, bangs, dark eyes. She was dressed in riding habit. Her face was sharp, with tilted eyes and a foxy pointed chin. And indeed, her whole expression, the upturned corners of her mouth, not a real smile at all, seemed foxy also. She looked exactly like the murdered woman, or more precisely, as that woman might have looked alive and 15 years younger. Jury changed the subject. "Tell me, Harkins, about the Colonel." "Rich. Very rich. The baronetcy was conferred upon his father. He's master of the foxhounds, and he owns half of Rackmoor, from what I can judge." "Who are Colonel Crail's heirs?" "Heir, Chief Inspector. They're just the one. Julian Crail, his son. Wiggins had been sitting there with a fresh cup of tea, thinking and stirring.
The prodigal daughter, sir. The last person the son had won is the one who's been away for donkey's years and having people blabbering all over her return.
Jury and Harkins both looked at him. You're quite right. She'd be the very last person. Jury looked at the police photographs. There must have been a lot of blood. It's hard to believe some of it didn't splash on the murderer's clothes. We found a large piece of stained canvas, spattered with blood, kind of canvas an artist uses. It might have come from Adrian Reese's place, studio, whatever he calls it. And he did a lot of mouthing off about murder. I've done a list of names for you. We must have interviewed nearly the whole damn village, and I've winnowed out most of them, got it down to the names you might want to talk with first. The Crails, naturally. And Adrian Reese is the last one we know of to have seen Gemma Temple alive. He passed her on Great Lane just before she was killed. Jury folded and pocketed the list. I'll see him first, then, before the Crails. Drawing on his gloves, Harkins dropped, Jury was sure, his pièce de résistance. Oh, by the way, there's a bit of a complication. Lily Siddons, she's the young woman who runs the Bridgewalk Cafe, claims the murderer made a rather dreadful mistake.
Mistake?
Lily Siddons claims she was the intended victim. Harkins smiled all round the table, as if to let them know the code they had just finished breaking had all been misinformation in the first place. I think it's all eyewash, frankly. Big for the limelight, she probably is. But the costume, she says, was her own, and that's where the killer made his mistake. I'll be on my way. It's a bit of a drive to Pitlochry. Hope I've been of some help. Jury stared at his feet. I'm most eternally grateful to you. At the Old Fox, Kitty Meacham was readying up for the 11 a.m. trade, wiping the china beer pools, polishing the dark counter. Jury smiled. It was a smile that had melted harder hearts than Kitty Meacham's. He tossed 2 50p pieces on the counter. Buy us a beer, Kitty.
I don't mind if I do.
Cheers. Jury raised his glass. What happened the night of the murder, Kitty? Did you see Gemma Temple?
I did. Went off to my room about 10, and she was in hers. Called me in, she did, to have a look at her costume. Quite smashing she was, all that white satin and black velvet. Said she was just about to put this grease paint on her face.
You say this was at 10? Kitty nodded.
10 or 10 past, I'd say.
And she was about to leave after she'd put on the makeup?
That's what she said. She'd be leaving directly. And that's the last I ever saw of her, poor thing.
Who'd she get friendly with while she was here? Anyone? Kitty shook her head.
No one in here, except she did talk to Maud Brixenham a few times. Maud comes in regular at lunchtime. And then there was Adrian.
Jury looked up from his beer. Adrian?
Adrian Reese. I think she talked to him once.
Why'd you not want to mention it?
Oh, I'd not be wanting to get Adrian in trouble. But he was in here that very night going on about murder. About some character in a book. And the awful thing is, Adrian was the last to see her alive. Mr. Harkins was all over him.
Now, what do you think, Kitty?
Tush, Adrian couldn't kill anyone. He gets loud, he does, and throws himself about, but...
She shook her head and drank her beer. Jury stared at his. This costume, I understand, belonged to a girl named Lily Siddons.
Lily, yes, sir, that's right. Lily gave it to her, loaned it to her. I don't know. And then Lily went with Maud Brixenham as...
Kitty pursed her lips.
Somebody out of Shakespeare, I can't remember.
Is Lily a special friend of the Crails?
Aye. Her mother was cook at Old House before she died.
Jury was surprised. Daughter of the Crails' cook? Sir Titus must be very egalitarian. I mean, to socialize with his servants' children.
It's not the same at all. Lily's special to him. She lived up there with her mother for a while when her dad just took himself off.
People certainly disappear around here, don't they? Did you see Lily the night of the murder?
I did. We always have a bit of a talk around closing time. She lives just across the way. That funny little house where the High and Great Lane come together. I ran over after closing. 11:25 it was. I saw her light on.
Jury took out his notebook. I thought she went to the party.
She left early. With Maud Brixton and Maud's nephew. That's Les Aird. Lily didn't feel good, she said. I know it's important because of when the temple girl was killed.
Jury looked up at her. You know the exact time she was killed?
Oh, lass, sir, everybody in Rackmore knows. Stabbed a dozen times she was.
Jury smiled. Both you and Lily have pretty good alibis, then. Tell me, Kitty, who'd want to kill Lily Siddons?
Lily, sir? What do you mean?
You were a friend of hers. Didn't she tell you she thought someone had mistaken Gemma Temple for her, in the costume?
My God! No, she never mentioned it.
Did they look alike?
No, but in that costume it'd be hard to tell, I mean, in the fog and the dark.
As Jury drained his glass, Kitty was saying that she seldom let the rooms.
Not much call for it in winter. Why, the first stranger I've seen in 2 months is a gentleman yesterday afternoon sitting over there in the corner, reading some French book and drinking Old Peculiar. Whoever drinks that anymore?
Old Peculiar and French literature. What did this gentleman look like?
Kind of tall, fair hair, quite smashing eyes.
Green?
Green is right. They fairly glitter. How'd you know?
Melrose Plant. What the devil was he doing in Rackmore? Melrose Plant was sitting at one end of the Crailes' dining room table, which was dark and glassy as a moonlit tarn and seemed 1/4 of a mile long. He was having a late breakfast. Colonel Craile had gone to kennels in Pitlochry. Julian had gone for his morning walk. Melrose was just as glad. He thought the Colonel a grand old man, but he did not like Julian. Among other things, he was suspicious of terribly handsome men, and Julian had more than his share in that department. Or was he, in early middle age, simply jealous of youth? Yet Julian was not really youth. He was probably no more than 5 or 6 years younger than Melrose. As Melrose was dissecting his second kipper, Olive Manning, the housekeeper, walked into the dining room, jingling. Melrose had thought that chatelaines went out with the Bronte sisters and Gothic novels, but here was one in truth, a host of keys suspended from the housekeeper's waist. He rose and pulled out a chair.
"Join me for a cup of coffee?"
She looked uncertain, and not, he suspected, because of her position in the household. Olive Manning was treated almost as one of the family, but because she seemed to regard him with something like suspicion. He would have to pivot round the subject of the 12th night party, which was what he wanted to question her about. Melrose did not like Olive Manning either. He did not like her tight features, her narrow chin, constricted brow, mouth bunched like grapes. She seemed to register a perpetual and controlled anger at the world. She sat down, declined coffee, and lapped her hands on the table.
"Mrs. Manning, Sir Titus says that you were Lady Margaret's closest companion."
"Aye?
I'm very sorry I didn't know her. My father, Lord Ardry, spoke of her, said she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen."
It was clearly the right line to take. Mrs. Manning very nearly smiled.
"Indeed, I've yet to see a lovelier woman. Her hair, when she let it down, was like a wash of sunlight. The boys both got it, Julian and Rolf. Rolf is dead too, as you know."
"Yes, awful to have both of them, the mother and the son, die at the same time. A motor accident, the Colonel said?"
She sighed. 18 years ago it was. Rolf was only 32.
The tight-fisted look had begun to resolve itself into something akin to suffering. He knew she had a son in a mental institution, but he was not going to broach that subject. He glanced at her sideways.
"Do you like to hunt, Mrs. Manning?"
Safe ground. The face relaxed again.
"I do, yes. I've hunted ever since I was a girl, and in this house it would be difficult not to do it."
Melrose smiled. "Julian doesn't much like it there. That must not go down a treat with his father. Doesn't like parties either, eh?" She stiffened up, sat back in her chair. Melrose decided to be more direct.
"Well, it's a pity he's come under suspicion. Julian, I mean."
She rose.
"I know who you mean, Lord Ardry. It's ridiculous, of course."
It's just plain plant, Mrs. Manning, not Lord Ardry.
I see.
If you'll excuse me, then. The grey, brindled cat uncurled itself from its window ledge at the Rackmoor Gallery, looked at Jury, yawned through the glass, and recurled itself. Stuck between the glass and window moulding was a small sign. Open. Jury and Wiggins went in. A bell tinkled. From regions above, a rich baritone called down to wait just a minute. The owner of the voice then clattered downstairs. He was wearing jeans, a blue guernsey, a nautical cap, a leather apron streaked with magenta paint, and a cigar behind his ear. Jury pulled out his card. "Mr. Rees, my name's Jury. Chief Inspector, CID, Scotland Yard, and Sergeant Wiggins, I know." Jury pocketed his identification. "News travels fast, does it?" "In Rackmoor, Chief Inspector, there's nothing else to travel." "You're here to question me about this murder. Look, I wonder, would you mind coming upstairs where I do my work and question me? I'm not trying to impress you with the dedicated artist bit, but the paint's drying on a canvas and I won't be able to mess it about if it does, okay?" Jury and Wiggins followed Adrian Rees up a small enclosed staircase into a very large room, awash in grey light, coming largely through the skylight. The room was bare, except for the canvases stacked 3 and 4 deep all around the walls, landscapes, still lives, paintings that looked like the painter had dipped fingers in a pot and flicked them at the canvas, and portraits. Adrian was hunkering down over a canvas. He picked up a bucket and poured. Wiggins was fascinated. Jury sat down on one of the several available stools, all of them paint-splattered. "You saw Gemma Temple just before she was killed, Mr. Rees?" Intent upon running one of the red streams off to the left, Adrian nodded. "I was walking up Grape Lane, from the Fox. I only saw her across the pavement, and it was foggy, as usual." "Are you saying you didn't get a good look, Mr. Rees?" "No, I got a good look, all right. I'll never forget. Come here a moment." Jury followed him to the other end of the room, where Adrian pulled a covering away from a small canvas. The figure had not been fully painted in, but the background was impressive. Darkness, mist, an aureole of light around a street lamp, and the dim impression of a cloaked figure. "You mean this is Gemma Temple?" Adrian nodded. "I wish you'd finish it. It might be of some help." Adrian covered it up again. "I'd forgotten it was the 12th night party. I don't go to those things, can't stand them, but don't tell the Colonel I said that. He's a real patron of the arts, and he's usually good for a no-interest loan, and a commission here and there." They were back with the large canvas now, and Adrian was positioning a small bucket of green paint. "Sergeant, help out a bit, will you? When this green gets to your side, turn it back." Wiggins seemed honoured. "Oh, well, if Inspector Jury—" Jury put out his hand for the notebook, and Wiggins rolled up his sleeves and hunkered down. Jury took out his pen. "Go on, Mr. Rees." "I don't think she saw me. She stopped for a second under the lamp near the steps." "How did you know it was Gemma Temple?" "I didn't, Inspector. Not until I got back there a couple of hours later, rubbernecking with the rest of the villagers. I heard police sirens. Police sirens in Rackmoor? Couldn't believe it. So I pulled on my pants and went for a look." "Did you see the body, Mr. Rees?" "No, who could? There were police crawling all over the Angel Steps, but there was talk that it was one of the mummers, some woman in a black and white costume." "And then what did you do?" "Came back here. I was a bit nervous, couldn't sleep, so I started in on this." "You talked to her, hadn't you, once or twice in the pub?" Adrian looked at him for a long moment, smoking. "Once or twice, yes. She told me nothing about herself, except she was from London." "And she didn't mention why she was visiting Rackmoor?" Adrian shook his head. "Damn strange that is, too. Rackmoor in January is hardly the place for your halls, is it?" Jury thought for a moment. "Can you think of any reason why anyone would want to kill Lily Siddons?" "Lily? For God's sakes, no. Why do you ask?" Jury didn't answer. He stood up, made a sign to Wiggins, who rose too from his position of contemplating the canvas. "Incidentally, Mr. Rees, are you missing a piece of canvas that you know of?" His eye trailed off to a corner of the room in which were stacked paint pots, frames, canvas,
Canvas? What? I haven't looked, really. Why? Do you lock your shop when you leave? Christ, no. The idea of anyone stealing paintings is a bit... He shrugged. Jury nodded. Thanks. I'll be talking to you later. I'm sure you will. Adrian wiped his hands on a rag and led them downstairs. The home of Sir Titus Crail, Bart, was an Elizabethan manor house overlooking the giant knobbled cliffs of the North Sea. It looked as if it were built of the same Magnesian limestone as the walls surrounding the city of York, and was washed to a continuous whiteness by rain. It rose from a thick layer of ground mist, looming through great spoons of fog. Wiggins drove the police-issue Ford up the gravel drive and beside a large stable block, surprising a magnificent horse into rearing back. The elderly man on its back, tall, spare, and distinguished-looking, seemed in complete control of the horse, though, and dismounted. He walked over to the car. He held out a strong-fingered hand. "You're from Scotland Yard, aren't you? I'm Titus Crail. Forgive me for meeting you at the stables. Not very formal, I suppose, but I'm not very formal. Anyway, I just wanted a word with you before you went in. You don't mind talking out here, do you? Bracewood will turn a deaf ear." Jury looked round for Bracewood, and then realised the Colonel was talking about the horse. "No, sir, not really. I'll just have Sergeant Wiggins go in and have a talk with the servants." Wiggins looked grateful. He walked toward the house. Sir Titus explained. "Tell you the truth, Inspector Jury, I just wanted a word with you about this mess before you talk to Julian. We disagree so completely about that girl. I didn't want to go into it again when he was around. We simply infuriate one another. I'm certain this Gemma Temple was my ward, Dilys March." He looked off over the mist-blanketed stones into the trees and talked about Dilys March. He said she had come to them when she was only 8 years old, after an airplane crash had carried off both mother and father. They were great friends of Lady Margaret. Margaret was my wife. There's a wonderful picture inside. Adrian Rees did it, and from only a photograph, it will appear to you as if he glamorized her, but he didn't. She really was very beautiful. Jury interrupted. "You were talking about Dilys March?" "Yes. She was a kind of adopted daughter, really. I mean, we treated her like our own, though we never legally adopted her." "According to Inspector Harkin's report, your own statement, sir, Dilys March was about to inherit money from your late wife's estate, and then she suddenly left." The Colonel shrugged. "It wasn't all that much. Only £50,000, when she was 21. Was Dilys March the sort of person who would have walked off and left an inheritance behind? And it would have been more than £50,000, wouldn't it, eventually? She'd have got more from you." "To answer both of your questions, Inspector, no, she wasn't. And yes, she would. I admit her leaving that way surprised us. But there had been incidents before. Dilys would simply drive off. I gave her a red Mini for her 16th birthday. She was always going off in it. Once for as much as a week. We brought her back from London." "When she left this last time, you didn't call the police?" "Actually, the police called us. They'd found her car in London, apparently abandoned. Not a clue as to where she was. They quite naturally assumed that she'd left off her own bat, you know. But I suppose they'd also got to consider foul play. I had a chauffeur, Leo Manning. That's Olive's, my housekeeper's son. It turned out there'd been something going on between Dilys and Leo was the last person to see her, and that brought him in for a rather heavy dose of suspicion. His mother thinks it's what sent him over the edge. He's in an institution, and Olive has always hated Dilys March." "What reason did she give, Gemma Temple, that is, for staying away so long, Sir Titus?" "Remorse. Shame. Her life had not been, I judge, too savoury. Look, Inspector, if Gemma Temple, or whoever she was an impostor, how in God's name would she have carried it off? How could she have known all the things she did know? Even little things about Dilys's childhood?" Jury studied the older man. "Collusion. Someone in Rackmoor, someone in your own house, possibly, who knew a lot about Dilys March. Someone who might have wished to split the profits, or out of revenge, jealousy,
There are other motives. Now, who might have known her well enough?
The only others besides Julian and me would be Olive Manning. Well, I suppose I've talked a great deal about Dilys to Maud Brixenham, a good friend of mine. And Adrian Rees, when he was doing Margaret's portrait.
He rubbed his hand down Bracewood's neck.
This house was quite a different place when Margaret was alive. Always a lot of people. And there were Rolf and Julian. Rolf was older by 14 years. They both looked like her. There was that spun gold hair. Julian looks exactly like her. I only wish he were like her in other ways. Rolf was more fun-loving. Perhaps too fun-loving. Women, you see. And then there was Dilys.
The Colonel looked down at the mist-shrouded courtyard. Finally, he smiled bleakly.
Aren't you going to ask me, where were you on the night in question?
Jury smiled. I was coming to it. You had a 12th night party, right? I suppose you were busy with your guests.
Yes, I was in and out and busy with my guests. Can't say I have an alibi, though. I mean, I can't account for myself completely during the times in question. Not like Julian.
Jury looked toward the front of the house. I see. I think I should talk to Julian now. Sir Titus mounted up, rubbed the neck of his horse.
I'll be off then. I'm always here if you need me.
I expect I will. And there's one other thing. You have a visitor staying with you?
Why, yes, as a matter of fact. An old friend. Well, rather, the son of an old friend, Lord Ardry. This Lord Ardry, the son, I mean, just goes by the family name. Melrose Plant, he calls himself.
I know. I've met him. In Northamptonshire, as a matter of fact.
Yes, that's right. He was telling me about it. Quite a nasty business, wasn't it?
Murder usually is. The butler took Jury's coat, told him that Mr. Julian had not yet returned from his walk, but that, yes, he would certainly fetch Lord Ardry. Jury reflected as he looked the hall over, an imposing mixture of dark panels and Doric columns, that Plant might have given up the title, but everyone else seemed to be giving it back to him. Melrose Plant stood at the entrance of the long gallery, leisurely smoking a cigarette. Jury was delighted to see him.
Mr. Plant, I can hardly believe it. Understand you're an old friend of the family. I was in York when I found out what happened. I always seem to be around just when you don't need me.
On the contrary, Mr. Plant, you might be very useful, having the run of the house, so to speak, navigating the waters.
Ha! That would be tricky. Julian Crail is rather a formidable iceberg. He spends a great deal of time walking the cliffside and the moors, and generally being pale and interesting.
Melrose shrugged and changed the subject.
I've been following your career in the newspapers. I knew you'd been put in charge of this case. I must admit I rather enjoyed that business in Long Piddleton, though that might seem a trifle macabre. Indeed, I enjoyed it almost as much as Agatha.
Jury looked quickly around.
How will I ever get on without her? She's not here, is she? You're safe, Inspector. She's not. Now. Could I induce you to have dinner with me at the Fox Deceiv'd? How about 6? Tell Sergeant Wiggins, too. Have you seen Wiggins, then? Yes. He's in the kitchen, exhorting the cook to confess. I'll go along there, then. See you at 6, Mr. Plant.
Plant's face, Jury saw, was beaming as he made a brief note in his pocket diary. The little notebook looked surprisingly like Jury's own. In a kitchen the size of a rugby field, Wiggins was hunched over his notebook, a pot of tea and a plate of sandwiches. Across from him sat a plump, red-faced woman of indeterminate age, her brown hair drawn back in a neat bun.
This is Mrs. Thetch, Chief Inspector. She's just been kind enough to give me tea. I'll just get you a cup, sir.
Mrs. Thetch started up, but Jury waved her down. No, thanks. Tell me, Mrs. Thetch, how long have you been with the Crails?
18 years. I was just telling the sergeant.
You knew Lady Margaret, then?
Yes, sir, but not very well. I came just before... You know. I was vegetable cook for a few months. Then after Mary Siddons died, poor thing, I stopped on as cook.
This Mary Siddons, she had a daughter, Lily?
Yes, sir. We still see Lily. Terrible about her mother. Drowned,
She did. No one ever knew why she'd be walking along that stretch of shingle so near to high tide. There's a long, narrow strip right at the bottom of the cliff that'll take you from Wreckmoor as far as Runner's Bay, but you can only walk it when the tide's out. Poor Mary Siddons must have tried to walk it when the tide was coming in.
Wood, the butler, appeared to tell Jury that Mr. Julian was waiting for him in the Bracewood room. Apparently the colonel named his rooms after his horses. As he followed Wood, Jury thought, 1 disappearance, 2 auto-accident victims, 1 in a mental institution, 1 drowned, 1 murdered. Wreckmoor, for all its bracing sea air, didn't seem the healthiest place in the British Isles. When Jury walked into the Bracewood room, he knew he'd found the portrait of Lady Margaret Crail. It hung above the marble mantelpiece, dominating the room, and the room's other occupant, Julian Crail.
"I'm Julian Crail," said the man beneath the portrait. "That was my mother."
The identification of Julian Crail as the son was quite superfluous. Had Julian Crail been a woman, a girl, he might have been the twin of the seated woman. The pastel colouring, the deeply set blue eyes, the corn-silk hair, he looked himself as if he had stepped down from a painting. I didn't introduce myself. Richard Jury, C.I.D. I wanted to ask you a few questions about Gemma Temple, Mr. Crail.
What about her? You mean, why don't my father and I agree as to whether she was Dilys March? Why should we, since we agree on little else?
You're sure she wasn't Dilys March? Julian leaned forward.
Absolutely. It was a swindle. Would have been, that is.
Tell me, why did Dilys leave as she did? Colonel Crail says she'd gone off before. Julian nodded. Dilys was willful, selfish, spoilt. I suppose they gave her anything she wanted to make up for the loss of her parents. Nothing she did would have surprised me. Julian's eyes seemed to burn at Jury. I take it you did not care much for Dilys March. For a moment Julian turned his face away and did not answer.
Shouldn't you be asking me things more pertinent, Inspector? Such as, where was I at the time of the murder?
Jury smiled. According to your statement, you're in your room.
That's quite right. I dislike these Twelfth Night parties. My mother started it. She loved parties. So does the Colonel. I don't.
He seemed to be waiting for Jury to challenge this.
I'd like to show you something.
Julian walked over to the French doors, opened one, and beckoned to Jury. They went out into the icy air of the terrace. Rime edged the balustrade to which Julian had backed up, the sea behind him, the waves sucking against the hillside. He pointed.
Those are my windows.
Then he crossed the terrace to the left and pointed toward the village.
There's a path that connects up with these terrace steps, and that's the way people came and went, all night long, Inspector Jury. As to the inside, there are 2 doors to my room. Both face the landing, where the musicians were playing the evening long. True, they did take a bit of a break, but there was always someone out there. I went to my room at 10. The party had started already. I could not have come out without someone seeing me. Even if that were remotely possible, I surely could not have gone out and come back without someone seeing me.
And you couldn't even have scaled the wall, Jury said. They were back in the drawing room now, Jury bending matches down one by one in the book he had taken from the table.
Do you often stay at the Saury Hotel, Mr. Crail? It's quite exclusive. In Mayfair, isn't it?
A moment of bewilderment, and Julian regained his icy insouciance.
Our family use it. I go up to London occasionally. Why do you ask that?
Jury held up the matches, cover out. Gemma Temple came from London.
Well, good God, Inspector. So does Adrian Reese. So does Maud Brixenham. And Olive Manning just got back from London. Half the world's in London.
Charming evasion. Jury changed the subject. Tell me about Lily Siddons.
What in God's name does she have to do with it?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Wasn't there a dinner party here the night before the murder?
Oh, yes. Miss Temple's debut.
Father invited Lily, along with Rhys and Maud, but I still don't understand the costume. The costume Gemma Temple was wearing really belonged to Lily Siddons. There was, apparently, some swapping. Julian stared. "Are you telling me the murderer meant to kill Lily?" Jerry didn't answer, just looked at him. Julian snorted, shook his head like a hound baffled by a fouled line. "To tell the truth, I wasn't paying much attention to their conversation. Oh, yes, this Temple woman decried the fact she hadn't a costume. I left around then." Jerry thought for a moment. "You know, I sometimes feel murders are done in the past, in a manner of speaking. That what was really meant was to kill someone a long time ago, and it's taken all this time of dragging the feeling around, like a dead body, really, until one finally manages to get on with it, and dumps the corpse in the present, on the angel steps, somewhere." He stopped, because of the look on Julian's face. It was ashen, blighted, stricken. It lasted for only a couple of seconds, but it was sharp enough to convince Jury that Julian had been about to admit something, to step over a precipice, and had then quickly drawn back his foot. All Julian said was, "As to Lily, my father's very fond of Lily. She takes him back. In some small way, she helps to create the illusion that it's not all over." "Then does Lily Siddons come in for any money, Mr. Crail?" Julian frowned. "Probably. Why?" "Simply that anyone who did have a claim on your father's capital, either literal or emotional, might have some reason for wanting Dilys March out of the way for good and all." Julian could only stare. "Ye gods! First Lily's victim, and now murderess. The idea of her wielding that knife is preposterous. She's so eminently sensible. And she hasn't the passion to do murder. Lily's a bit of an iceberg, the original Snow Queen." "Who do you think might have done it, Mr. Crail?" Julian gave a short laugh. "No one. Oh, let's see now. There's Adrian Rhys. He's certainly a fiery sort." "Did he know enough about Dilys March to prime Gemma Temple?" "I don't know. The Colonel certainly confides in people. Maud Brixenham, for example. If I'm not altogether blind, she would like to become Lady Crail. Maud would not want Dilys coming back and laying claim, as you put it, to my father's affections. Nor would Olive Manning. I think she blames my father for letting the sordid affair go on between Leo and Dilys. Her son is in some mental institution. But to give the devil her due, Dilys, that is, Leo Manning was round the bend long before he came here. He was no damn good, either as a chauffeur or as a person. But of course his mother doesn't believe that. No, it was all Dilys's fault. All our fault, I gather. Papa pays the bills for Leo Manning. He's a generous man. There are probably annuities in that will of his all up your arm." Julian looked at Jury. "No, Inspector, he would not disinherit me for Dilys March. Of course he might leave it all to the Kennel Club or the Destitute Huntsman's Organisation. Perhaps this Gemma Temple simply meant to pick up Dilys March's £50,000 and leave." Jury glanced around the room. "Or stay." Julian shook his head in disbelief. "She couldn't have got away with it. Never. It's one thing to get through 48 hours of posing as someone else, but to play-act that out over a long period?" The Jury was silent for a moment. "Dilys March was, I take it, not universally liked." "Quite correct." "But, Mr. Crail, she was only 18 when she left here. Chronologically, Inspector. What were her relations with men?" "She probably had one with any man she came in contact with. She liked to cause trouble, to make sparks fly. Yet the question remains, if this woman was not Dilys March, well, where is she? Why hasn't Dilys ever come back?" Julian looked down, studying the rug. "I thought perhaps, she might be dead." Winter, with that remark, seemed to settle in the room. Jury had the oddest sensation of snow driven into corners, ice formed on sills, rime on mirrors. The mantle of depression, to which he was never wholly a stranger, wrapped him in ever heavier folds. Bertie switched off the hoover and saluted the small statue of the Virgin which stood on the mantel over the electric log.
All shipshape and Bristol fashion.
Bertie's concept of religion leaned heavily towards the concept of salvation through duty, not grace.
Come along, Arnold.
Smartly, he turned on his heel, picking up the hoover and throwing one arm across his chest with the hand like a blade on the neck of the vacuum.
Hip, hip.
He marched it to the closet. Arnold always watched the hoovering closely, and sometimes rooted things like old sweet wrappers out from under chairs. Bertie marched back to the parlour for a look round.
That ought to satisfy Frog Eyes.
Arnold's bark was as smart as Bertie's salute. The name Frog Eyes always elicited a hostile response. Frog Eyes, or Miss Frotherguy, as she was known to the village, was one of several women who had appointed themselves Bertie's guardians in the absence of his mum. There were also Miss Cavendish, the librarian, and Rose Honeybun, the vicar's wife. They took turns looking in on Bertie. Of the three, Miss Frotherguy was the most disliked, largely because of her clear antipathy towards Arnold, whom she regarded as wholly unsuitable as a companion for the motherless boy. As far as Arnold was concerned, Miss Frotherguy didn't go down a treat either. Arnold would plant himself 4 square in front of her and subject her to ruthless stares. Miss Frotherguy had a thin-lipped, peevish little face that reminded Bertie of one of those sharp-nosed mice in the roly-poly pudding story. Miss Cavendish, on the other hand, was not so sharp. Codfish, Miss Cavendish, did not seem to enjoy the charge she'd been given by Miss Frotherguy, and would do little more than poke her head in Bertie's front door, her pale eyes darting here and there like little silverfish. She did not stay to tea. Rose Honeybun was the best of the lot, and she did stay to tea, and supplied most of it, since her Christian duties were released largely through supplying Bertie with cakes and Bath buns. She liked to sit at the table, downing cup after cup of tea, and smoking cigarettes, and trying to pry out of Bertie whatever chunks of gossip she could, as if she was searching for plums in a tart. Among the 3 of them it was like a relay race, with Bertie the stick handed from one to the other. It was Frog Eyes who was causing the most trouble. It was she who kept wanting to get the authorities in. Frog Eyes was sure more suitable arrangements could be made. Bertie recoiled at the thought. He knew there were homes, and he certainly knew there were police stations. Those were the only authorities he assumed would be at all interested in his case. So when Inspector Harkins came knocking at his door, Bertie got all whoozy and thought for the first time in his life he might faint. But the inspector hadn't come. He had come about a murder. The girl who opened the door at the Bridgewalk Café had a face too thin for conventional beauty, but a fragile blondness, transparent like glass. It was already dark at 5 o'clock, and mist layered the air between the girl and jury. An oil lamp behind her fuzzed the outline of the dress she wore, low-necked and white, full and formless. It fit her like a cloud, made her ghostly. Jury thought all she needed was a tallow in her hand to make him think he'd been dropped into some revenge tragedy. Jury handed over his card. "Miss Siddons, I'm Richard Jury. I hope I haven't come at a bad time. I need to ask you a few questions."
"Oh, come on in."
She had an unusual face, now that he could see it better, triangular, with amber eyes. Her skin had the sheen of pearls. Jury looked over the sitting room, stuffed with flowered chintz chairs and bric-a-brac. Little ornaments and pictures seemed to overflow every corner, shelves, mantels, tables. One picture showed a young woman on a pier in the outmoded dress of the 50s, catching at the brim of her hat. For a snapshot, it was very good, much the best of the pictures on the table, fresh, alive, and the girl quite lovely. He returned that picture to its place and looked over the others, crowded on the table. Most of them were of the same woman, taken at different places, different times. He assumed the woman must be Lily Siddons' mother. "That's my mother." Her voice came from behind him, confirming it. "She's dead now. She died young." Jury looked round. The Duchess of Malfi? What? I thought you were quoting from the play. That line was spoken by her brother, the Duchess's, I mean. Cover her face. She died young. The brother, Ferdinand, was mad. She wrapped her arms around herself. Like Julian Crail, you mean? Julian Crail? Lily sat down on a small chintz-covered sofa. He was always odd. Jury shook his head. Odd? In what way? She shrugged her shoulders, as if dismissing Julian Crail. Did he kill her, Inspector? The blandness of her tone, as much as the question, surprised Jury. Why do you say that? Because he's capable of it, I suppose? Jury smiled slightly. We're all capable of it, given the right circumstances. With her cat's eyes, she regarded Jury coolly. I don't believe that. Could you? Murder somebody? Yes, I expect so. But you were speaking of Julian. She pushed her fair hair away from her shoulders. I've never liked him. I suppose you know I lived in that house for a long time, all the while I was growing up, until my mother died. Colonel Crail's the only one of them who's really decent, a gentleman. Jury continued on with the questioning. You went to a dinner party at Old House the night before the murder? Yes. The Colonel invited me up to dinner. I thought at first she... Lily Siddons appeared distracted or meditative, running her hand across her brow. What, Lily? Didn't Colonel Crail tell you she looked exactly like his ward? Didn't he tell you about Dilys? You tell me. They took her in after her parents died. She was 5 years older, but we more or less grew up together. She liked to lord it over me. I was only cook's girl, see? In games, I was always the handmaiden, and she the Duchess. She always kept telling me no matter how much I put myself about, I'd never be as if I thought. And how did you feel when you first saw Gemma Temple, then? Lily looked Jury straight in the eye. I was afraid she'd come back. If you want someone with a motive, yes, I had one. After my father left us, Mummy and me, we had to live there. I suppose it was very decent of the Crails having me in, giving me a roof. But Dilys, she was like a fallen tree across my path. I couldn't move her. I couldn't get round her. Lily stopped and looked into the fire. Jury took out his notebook. Inspector Harkins says you told him you think that the person who killed Gemma Temple really meant to kill you. That's very strange, Lily. Would you mind explaining that? Someone has been trying to kill me. The first time was when I was riding. It was back in October. I jumped a wall near Tan How and just barely missed a big hay rake, which had been left on the other side. A few more inches, and I'd have gone down on the tines. It was upended. Could anyone have known where your ride would take you, though? Even assuming the hay rake had been left there purposely? Well, that's the point. I'd been practicing jumping at just that place, because during the last hunt, my horse refused that wall several times, and I was trying to get him over the fear. Of course, then I thought it was accidental. When was the next time? 3 or 4 weeks later, in November. It was the brakes on my car. They failed. I keep it in the lot at the top of the hill. I don't use it at all in the village, except this one day I had to load up at the cafe. When I got in the car, I remembered I needed some things in Whitby. So instead of driving down the hill then, I drove the other way, thank God. You've seen that hill. You see, it wasn't until this thing with Gemma Temple that I figured it out. Those other times weren't accidents. So why was Gemma Temple wearing your costume, Lily? At dinner the night before, the Colonel said that Gemma hadn't a costume, and could I lend her something? Then Maud suggested Maud and I, go as Sebastian and Viola out of Twelfth Night, so I let Gemma wear mine. So all of these people at dinner the evening before knew you wouldn't be wearing the black and white costume? Lily shook her head. No, only Maud and the Colonel. The others weren't in the room at the moment we discussed it. Anyway, at the 12th night party I got a little sick. I think it must have been the fish paste sandwiches. They've never agreed with me. Jury looked down at his notebook. You told Inspector Harkins you got back to the cottage here around 10:15. That's right. Maud stayed with me for a bit to make sure I hadn't got a bad case of food poisoning, Then she left. I got into my robe and read for a while, till about 11. Adrian Rees saw Gemma Temple walking along Grape Lane a little after, about 11:15, just before the Fox closed, near the Angel Steps. I know. Jury waited, but Lily said nothing. And Kitty Meacham stopped here to see you just after the pub closed. That'd be around 11:30 or even earlier, about 11:25. Lily rolled her head back and forth wearily. I don't know. I suppose so. I wasn't looking at the time. It's important. Unless you could move quicker than lightning, you could hardly have got to the Angel Steps and back in 10 minutes. She looked at him, her eyes darkening to the colour of cornelian. You don't believe me, do you? That someone's trying to kill me? It's not that. But what would be the motive? Money? Revenge? Jealousy? I've no money. And as far as I know, I certainly haven't done anything to anyone. Jealousy? Of what? Men, we could start there. Did you ever feel that the Colonel thought you and Julian might... He stopped when the colour flared up in her cheeks. Julian? Me and Julian? That's daft. The Crayles don't marry the daughters of servants. Her eyes strayed to the little pie-crust table, studded with all the pictures. Her hand went to the one of the woman on the pier. I don't like bringing this up, Lily. It must be painful. That day your mother drowned, why would she have taken such a dangerous path when the tide was about to come in? Lily's head was bent over the picture, and she was crying. I'm sorry, Lily. I'll be going now. Jury walked out of the cottage and around the little cove to the Old Fox Deceiv'd. When Melrose and Jury surveyed the room at the Old Fox Deceiv'd, several pairs of eyes stared back. A great deal of celebrity had attached itself to Jury. Melrose looked around the saloon bar. I expect the entire field of them to rush through, giving chase, yelling, Wyndham, Wyndham, or some such rot. I feel like I'm back in the middle of Tom Jones. Over in the corner, Kitty seemed to be having an argument with Bertie Makepeace, who was white-aproned and carrying a tray under his arm. Arnold was lying across the sill of the door. Kitty made her way to the table.
Excuse me, Mr. Jury. Bertie is making a fuss. I do give the lad work here. I know he's but 12 and he shouldn't be working in a public house. The thing is, you see, his mum's left, and the child does need the money. He wants to wait on your table awful bad, and you being the police and all.
Jury interrupted. The child labour laws are hereby rescinded. He smiled. Melrose watched Kitty Meacham grip the back of the empty chair, probably to keep from melting at Jury's feet. Jury gave his order to Bertie. Veal and kidney pie, please. In an effort of concentration, Bertie screwed up his eyes and drew his mouth back, disclosing one missing tooth and others in a poor state of repair. A lock of brown hair stood up at the crown of his head like a small flag. Melrose opted for the mixed grill. Bertie dashed off, tray held high. How did you leave Lady Ardrey, Mr. Plant? With the greatest of difficulty, I assure you. She was on my coat-tails till the last. Jury smiled. I've missed her. No one else ever has. She's in York. If she knew you were here, she'd come rolling across the North York moors like a big snowball. Bertie brought their meal. Melrose sighed. I suppose you won't tell me, but who have you lined up as chief suspect? No one. Melrose poked suspiciously at his dinner. Julian Crayle would appear to have the strongest motive. Jury began on the fish. That's what Inspector Harkins thinks. But tell me why you think so, Mr. Plant. You've had more opportunity to observe him than I. You don't like him, obviously. I find him cold, hard-hearted, and secretive. They ate in companionable silence for a while. Then Melrose said, Old House reminds me of Poe's Usher. Unsuspecting, I drive up in my carriage at midnight, and Roderick, that'll be Julian, glooming away at the pianoforte, lit by candelabra. I'm just a plodding policeman, but your analogy is interesting. Roderick Usher. Jury remembered Lily Siddon's remark. Is it that you find Julian a trifle mad? A trifle mad? What a curious way of putting it. Losing one's mind is surely like losing one's virginity. Lose a little, lose a lot. Jury's gesture was dismissive. It doesn't take madness to commit murder. I'm only trying to understand these people. Melrose stuck his fork in a grilled tomato. That house echoes with the past. They live in the past. Jury swirled the dregs of his wine. Don't we all? Melrose insisted on paying for the meal, and Jury excused himself to have a few words with Kitty. Putting on his coat, Melrose said to Bertie, "The excellence of the food was only exceeded by the superior service." Bertie was flailing the table with his napkin, decrumbing it. Arnold, seeing a flutter of activity, sat up, ears pricked. Melrose stuffed a £5 note in Bertie's pocket. "There, Copperfield, that'll help keep you out of Salem House." All Percy Blythe needed was an owl on his shoulder. He sat behind a Jacobean monstrosity of a library table, amidst the dark, dusty, and Gothic confusion of stuffed birds and fish, tallow candles, driftwood, fish netting, rank bits of clothing, old newspaper, and books. He was small, with peaked, satanic ears and rimless spectacles. Jury did not wait for introductions. He simply strode across the room and stuck out his hand. "Hello, Percy. My name's Jury. I'm with Scotland Yard. And this is Melrose Plant." Melrose smirked as Jury's hand hung, unshaken, stuck in mid-air. But what was that he had just taken out of his pocket and tossed on Percy's table? Tobacco? Chief Inspector Jury chewing tobacco? They were both of them chomping away. "Here, you're a roof thatcher, Percy. A lost art, that is. You're from Swaledale, aren't you?" Melrose watched Percy Blythe gum the tobacco, his face working like an accordion, collapsing and stretching, collapsing and stretching.
"Swaledale, aye? I'll be a thatcher in Edger for 40 year.
Don't see much of it any more.
Psh, won't trouble us then to do it proper. They chiggles the branches, they cuts away the bark, and the heads die. Or they drive jibs too close. Edger and thatcher and besom maker, I was the best in Swaledale, I was. There be me flaying spade on the wall."
He hooked his thumb over his shoulder towards some tools hung on the wall like pictures, all neatly arranged.
"Could braid axle sticks faster than spit, and cut belts too. Could tie threaves hauling, verity in a field full in a day. I made the black thatch roofs, they lastin' 50 year. I was bosom maker too, I was. Hand me my bosom needle on the wall."
This was directed at Melrose, as if commanding him to be of some use, rather than standing about like a stick. Melrose moved over to the spot, and the odd tools were hanging there. He had never seen anything like them. They were carefully labelled. Easing knife, twister, and what in hell was a whittling hook? He found the besom needle and separated it from its nail. It was a long, rod-like thing with a looped handle. Percy Blythe neglected to thank him for his trouble when he handed it over.
"Yes, one of the best, if I do say it, I was. And me daddy for me best mower ever was. Once he mowed 3 acre in a day. He could mow, he could whop fast as he walked, and he could walk across the field with 6pence on the blade. Touched me to stop, he did, and stop all day long when I was a lad. Got to walk up to that corn, you know. Guessed you come about that girl, the dead one."
"That's right, Percy. Do you know anything that might help?"
"Maybe do, maybe don't. Seen her in the Old Fox, and thought 'twas a ghost. 15 year it be since they're up and left."
"You're talking about Dilys March?"
"Aye, a bad un she be."
"Bad? In what way?" But Percy Blythe merely shut his eyes against the sins of youth. "Percy, you know Lily?"
"I do. She come here and we look at crystal. I taught her all she knows."
"Percy, do you think maybe Lily might know something about someone in Rackmoor, something that might be dangerous?"
"I don't know, man. Could be."
A long silence fell. Melrose was vastly relieved to see Jury rise. "Thanks for your help, Percy."
"You come back, lad."
Melrose noticed he had not been included in that invitation. Outside, Jury blew on his hands. Garrulous chap, isn't he?
Black twist, hedging, flaying spades. How in hell did you know all that?
Simple. I asked Kitty before we left the Fox. Jury looked at his watch. Well, I guess I'll pick up Wiggins. There's one more person I have to see. Maud Brixenham. Maud Brixenham walked through life scattering veils and pins, or so it seemed to Jury, as he watched the grey tulle scarf drift like a wave to the floor as her angular body moved between couch and credenza. Maud Brixenham sat opposite Jury and Wiggins, her hand held beneath her sherry glass like a small plate. She sighed.
I suppose you've come about that odd young woman.
Jury smiled. Odd? In what way, Miss Brixenham?
Actually, I was being polite. Conniving is what I meant. That whole Dilys March act.
You didn't believe the story?
Not for a moment. Do you?
But Sir Titus did.
Although he is my dearest friend, I must admit to his being rather gullible.
You're fond of Sir Titus? Jury's answer came in the two bright spots which flared up in her large, squarish face. Maud Brixenham was no beauty, but she had quality. The Colonel would have appreciated it. It was the sort of horse-breeding which runs to winners. You went to this 12th night party, did you?
Yes. Nearly everyone in Rackmore goes. Well, I went as Sebastian, and Lily went as Viola. I must say she made a handsomer twin than I, but then she's quite a handsome young woman. Les, that's my nephew, went as himself. He's always in costume. Cowboy hat, boots, fringed jacket or jean suit, T-shirts with awful pictures on them like tongues sticking out. She looked ceilingward. He's up there now. I can't think why the music isn't playing. Jury looked at his notes. Which way did you and Miss Siddons and Les, is it, return to her cottage?
Lily and I. Les went off through the woods, I think. At any rate, Lily and I came by way of the sea-wall. It's a bit longer, but that other path, the one Les took, is so dark and creepy. She shuddered and reached for her drink. You did talk with Miss Temple in the Fox Deceiv'd? Yes, I did. I spent a good deal of time at the Fox, actually.
What did you and Miss Temple talk about?
Nothing significant. She certainly didn't look like Rackmore, I tell you. Very Carnaby Street.
Casually, Maud Brixenham picked a bit of lint from her blouse.
I spoke to her even less at Titus's little dinner party. It was a small party, just Titus, Lily, Adrian, and this Temple person. I recall Miss Temple was sitting before the fire. Julian and I were standing about with our sherry. I believe that's when Lily came in. She seemed terribly shocked. I mean by this Temple woman's presence. She just froze there in the doorway, staring at her.
She was struck by the resemblance to Dilys March? Is that it?
Struck by it? She was utterly shocked.
A crash, not a crash exactly, more of a klaxon call, pulled their three heads up. What was at first a deafening clamour finally separated itself into just barely discernible instruments, electric guitars, drums, bass.
"Told you,"
said Maud. Without getting up, she reached to the bookcase against which leaned a long pole. Thump, 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 she banged on the ceiling. The clamour diminished.
"What a treat, the Grateful Dead. I will join them if he doesn't soon go back to the States."
"Is that your nephew? He's an American?"
"One look would tell you. He's my sister's boy. She thought it would broaden his horizons if he could spend his Christmas holes in England. Now he's here, and his holiday is supposed to be over, but I can't pry him loose."
She gave them a toothy smile as the song came to its raucous end and the music stopped. There was the clumping of heavy boots on the staircase. A young lad of about 16 cantered into the room. Cowboy hat, jeans, fringed jacket, dark glasses, all like separate stars fixed here and there, combined like an odd constellation in the midnight sky, so that he seemed to be more than just the sum of these parts. "My nephew, Les Aird. This is Chief Inspector Jury of Scotland Yard." Les Aird was searching for some posture encompassing both respect and ennui. Finally he settled for simply sticking out his hand and snapping his chin in a curt, serious nod. "Hey, it's cool." "I'd like to ask you a few questions, Les." "Okay, ask away, shoot." It's about the murdered woman. Had you ever seen her during the time she came here? Yeah, one foxy lady, man. Did you make any attempt to talk to her at all? Say what? Did you talk to her, Les? But you had seen her? Here and there. On the night she was murdered? Les Aird and Maud Brixenham spoke together. He said, yeah. She said, no. Maud looked exceedingly surprised. You didn't tell me that, Les. He shrugged. Didn't know it then. Jury remarked, you didn't tell Inspector Harkins either, Les. Didn't know it then, either. I mean, that it was her. All he said was this lady got blown away. He never described her. It was after we left the party, maybe around 10:30, quarter off, I saw her. With all those people in costume, I guessed she was just another one on her way up to the manor house. Which way did you take back to the village? I went down that part of the Angel Steps to Scroop Street. Arn was grooving along, so I walked with him to the high. I mean, it was weird, man. See that face come at you out of this wall of fog? Vampire time. Face was half black, half white. Les drew an imaginary line from his forehead down the bridge of his nose. Even Arn barked. It takes a lot to make Arn bark. Jury wondered at the time-lapse, as far as the temple woman was concerned. You saw her roughly at 10:30. Adrian Reese saw her just before the Fox Deceiv'd closed, around 11:15. Where was she during those 45 minutes? Beats me. I booked, man. Well, thanks, Les. Let me know if you remember anything else. Les jabbed his dark glasses back on his nose. Later days. Maud Brixenham followed Jury and Wiggins to the door. Don't get lost in the fog. Jury smiled. I don't think Rackmore's quite big enough to get lost in. Don't you believe it, Inspector? Used to be a smuggler's haunt. Easy to hide in, these twisting little streets. The depression and anxiety which had gripped Jury when he had been talking to Lily Siddons washed over him like a dark wave when he awoke the next morning. He tied his shoelace, got up, walked over to the cheval glass, looked in it, and for the 100th, no, 1000th time, wondered why he had become a policeman and why he remained one. He wondered, too, if he were acting in unconscious collaboration with Superintendent Racer to keep that superintendency, which he should have had long ago, at arm's length. As often happened when he was depressed, he studied his clothes with scrupulous attention to detail, as if, for example, the removal of a handkerchief from one pocket to the other would transform him from a frog to a prince. An image surfaced in his mind and quickly disappeared, like something floating on the edge of a pool, just out of range, reflecting briefly, sinking. It was looking in this mirror which had brought it to mind. He went back over everything he had done, standing there, but the thing refused to resurface again. He was sure that if he could find it, that small detail, he would have a very important piece of the puzzle. Like a migrating bird, Sergeant Wiggins always managed to fly to the warmth. Thus Jury found him near the kitchen hearth at the old house, with a pot of tea, seated across from Olive Manning. She did not lend warmth to the setting, however. She presented Jury a cool, dry hand, and a cooler smile. Jury drew up a chair. Mrs. Manning, I don't want to make you go back over everything you've told Sergeant Wiggins here. What I'm interested in is whether you thought this young lady was Dilys March. Decidedly, she shook her head. Definitely not. How can you be so sure, when Sir Titus fully believes she was? I'd say that was wishful thinking, Inspector Jury. There is certainly a superficial resemblance. Much more than superficial, surely, Mrs. Manning. From the pictures I've seen of the March girl, I'd say Gemma Temple was a dead ringer. That's true, Inspector. Only those pictures of Dilys are 15 years old, aren't they? And it's not merely the girl's looks. There are other things, gestures, speech. Not quite to the manner born, if you want to put it that way. I found her a bit vulgar. Breeding is breeding, after all. The Jury nodded. You were the one who saw Dilys March leave that night 15 years ago, weren't you? Tell me about it. I don't sleep well. I never have.
and I was up. I don't know what drew me to the window. Perhaps the car door slamming. I looked down and I saw her by the garage door. Then she got into that red car of hers and drove off, tore down the drive. She always drove that way. The jury looked over his notes. You just visited your sister in London, didn't you? 2 weeks before Christmas. Yes, I stay there when I go to visit my son, Leo, in hospital. I'd like a word with your sister, Mrs. Manning. Perhaps you could give me her address. She was flustered. Her hands seemed to beat in the air like small wings. I can't see why you need to talk to her. It's Fanny Merchant, Ebury Street, number 19. It's near Victoria. The jury got up, and Wiggins rose with him. Thank you, Mrs. Manning. I may need to talk to you again. Olive Manning did not reply, nor did she turn her head as they left the kitchen. In the hall they met the butler. Have you seen Mr. Plant this morning, Wood? No, sir. He's not been down, sir, at least not to my knowledge. Would you tell him, when you see him, I've gone to London? The jury smiled. And also tell him not to be forever stopping a bed. The butler's tiny smile seemed one of complicity, as if they, Wood and jury, were well acquainted with the ways of the gentry. Melrose Plant was in bed, or rather on it, but not in the way jury meant. He was lying fully clothed, staring up at the elaborately painted ceiling. He was smiling. He was thinking of Julian Crail's rooms, 3 doors down from his own room. Melrose had just taken the picture he was turning around in his hands from those very rooms. First he had made quite sure that Julian would be going for his morning walk by offering to accompany him. Julian had given him the same look he might have used had Melrose offered to share his bath water. Melrose had gone into Julian's rooms, not sure what sort of evidence he was looking for, nor had he thought he'd be lucky enough to find it. But he had. He quietly searched everything, every drawer, every shelf, every closet. It hadn't taken long, for the rooms were Spartan, almost dreary, with their moss-coloured draperies and heavy Tudor furniture. There were 2 rooms, a bedroom and a small study or library. Melrose began with the bedroom. Then he returned to the library. There was an arrangement of small framed photographs along the shelves. He recognized in several of them Julian in his younger days, recognized the elegant Lady Margaret, and knew that the black-haired girl had to be Dilys March. All told, 7 pictures of Dilys March, more of her than of anyone else, and yet Julian Crail professed not to like her at all. Melrose did not know what now brought unbidden to his mind an old trick of his mother's. When she had more photographs than frames, or when she had wanted to supplant an older, tireder picture with a fresher one, she had simply slipped out the cardboard backing and put the new in front of the old. Starting with the photos of Dilys and Julian, he pulled down the velvet backing and found nothing but the piece of cardboard. He repeated this process through 4 other pictures. On the 5th, the one of Dilys leaning against the fence, he found another snapshot. It was of Dilys in a park somewhere. But this girl was no longer a girl. She was a woman. Dilys March? Or was it Gemma Temple? Melrose had not seen the pictures of Gemma Temple, but if the likeness were as great as he had heard... In the 6th frame, he found another picture behind the first. Here she stood in front of a building, leaning against an iron railing. The building was indistinguishable from hundreds of brick buildings on city streets. Jury would have to see these pictures. Back in his own room, lying on his bed, Melrose knew he had found what he wanted. Whether the woman was Dilys March or Gemma Temple was to him at this moment almost irrelevant. Whoever she was, she shouldn't be turning up in a picture frame in Julian Crail's rooms. Back in London, Jury stopped off at his flat to pick up his mail. There was a light tapping on the door, apology sounding in the very knuckles. It was Mrs. Wasserman. "Oh, Inspector Jury, forgive me. I bet you just got in, but you know what happened." "Come on in, Mrs. Wasserman." Gingerly, she stepped inside, checking the corners for intruders.
"I'm just on my way to visit my friend, Mrs. Eaton, you know the one. Anyway, today, earlier, I was followed all the way from Camden Passage. There was this man."
The streets for Mrs. Wasserman were full of dangers. They leapt at her like slavering dogs behind ironwork fences. Jury wondered if the streets made her think of that limbo of ground which lay between the train she was once herded from and the camp. The fear which had begun there had rooted firmly in her mind, and could not be confined to its proper time and place. "Did you take along that whistle I gave you? Did you carry it with you?" She blushed and looked down.
"I admit, I forgot it."
"Oh, well, not to worry. Take it next time. I have to go out too. Are you going to the tube?"
"Yes, I am. In Chalk Farm, Mrs. Eaton lives."
Gemma Temple's roommate, Josie Thwaite, lived in Kentish Town. "Well, you're in luck, Mrs. Wasserman. I'm going to Kentish Town, and that's only a tube stop away, so you get a police escort."
"Oh, Mr. Jury, that would be wonderful."
Her grip on the black purse relaxed. The eyes which peered at Jury through the chain-locked door were a soft, vulnerable brown. He assumed they belonged to Josie Thwaite. "Miss Thwaite, I'm Inspector Jury of—" Her indrawn breath cut him off.
"Have you come about the L plates, then?"
"No, I wanted to ask you a few questions about your friend, Gemma Temple."
"Oh, sorry."
The door shut slightly as she drew back the chain. Then she opened it wide, scooping black hair away from her shoulder. Everything about her was apologetic. Her posture, her look, her voice. The air stirred with sadness. But not, apparently, about her roommate. There she was quite matter-of-fact.
"See, Gemma borrowed my car. It's because she just got her L plates, and she wanted to go on this holiday, only she wouldn't say where, except that she was afraid of getting stopped, and her only with the L plates. So it was my car. They found it in this place."
Rackmore, in Yorkshire. You said that you didn't know much about her past. How did you find Gemma?
"Through an advert. I needed someone to split the cost of the flat."
"So she answered your ad. Tell me, did you like Gemma? Did you get along okay?" She looked away.
"Well, we didn't have any real set twos, if that's what you mean. But I didn't like her all that much. And she was, vague about herself. I should have got references, shouldn't I?"
She looked at Jury, wide-eyed and apologetic, as if he might castigate her for being stupid. "Hindsight is always wonderful, Josie. Do you think Gemma Temple had any references to give, or was she pretty much a floater?" Josie leaned forward and lowered her voice a little, as if her mum might find her out here behind the barn, smoking and telling dirty secrets.
"Floater's too nice, I'd say. She brought men here. And not the same one twice, either, far as I know. I'd lie in bed in there and hear them."
"You're saying she worked the streets, is that it?" Josie nodded. "Why did you give her the loan of your car if you didn't trust her?"
"Well, hers was ever so much better, wasn't it? And she wrote me out something like a receipt. Said if anything happened to mine, I was to have hers. It's the yellow one out there now, but I expect they'll take it away."
Jury got up. Josie wrapped her sweated arms around her.
"Well, goodbye, Inspector. You don't think they'll do anything to me about the car, do you? I mean, letting her drive it and all?"
He handed her his card. "Just give me a call if anyone comes round. You didn't commit any crime, after all. Good night, then, Josie." Dead end, he thought, outside the block of flats. He flicked his cigarette into the gutter, and that was when he saw the small car, a sickly yellow in the ghostly glow of the street lamp. "You horse's arse," he said to himself, staring at the L plate. All that time talking about the plates, and he hadn't even tumbled to it. At 7:50 a.m., the ringing of the telephone overlapped in Jury's dream with a mournful wail of the Whitby bull, and when his eyes finally came unglued and he looked toward the window, he wondered why it wasn't blanketed with fog. He groped for the telephone beside his bed. Chief Superintendent Racer's voice slid down the wire. "London is lucky. You're back. The question is, why are you back, and why aren't you down here giving me a report? If it weren't for Sergeant Wiggins, who, along with the sense to blow his nose, also has the sense to report in, I wouldn't know where the hell you were, Jury. I want to see you within the hour. Get your socks on." The phone went dead. Fiona Klingmore was a pale blonde who favoured black. Today it was a tight black jumper tucked into a tight black skirt. She served as Racer's secretary and general dog's body. Fiona belonged to the 1940s. She was like a character from a dated play who had stumbled onto a modern stage. Whenever Jury looked at her, at the outmoded hairdo, the mouth reformed with red lipstick, the pillbox hats she liked, he was swamped by feelings of nostalgia. "How's the job, Fiona?" Jury asked, lighting her cigarette.
"I've been chased round deaths by better men than that one, haven't I?"
She handed him a cream-coloured envelope. "What's this?"
"Well, I don't know, do I, love? One of the PCs on duty downstairs brought it up. Said a gentleman brought it in late last night, some knob in a swell car, who thinks it's public parking outside the door and nearly got himself nicked. Told him to push off."
Jury had torn open the envelope, pulled out the single sheet of notepaper, and retrieved a snapshot which had fallen to the floor. He paid no attention to Fiona's chatter as he read. "Dear Inspector Jury, hope the enclosed will interest you. I found it in Julian Crail's room. I thought we could meet later at the George pub and return to Rackmore together. I've a very fast car." It was signed, Plant. Jury studied the snapshot. It certainly looked like a picture of Gemma Temple, or Dilys March, but it was a very recent picture. He assumed Plant had asked himself the same question. What was it doing in Crail's room? "Sounds like a right muddle," said Chief Superintendent Racer, after Jury had filled him in on the Rackmore case. "So why the hell aren't you up in this godforsaken village sorting it out? Why are you down here flat-footing it all over London?" "I told you, sir, I need to make some inquiries." Racer looked around him, arms extended, mock aghast. "Funny. I could have sworn we had a whole police force somewhere around here, all sorts of people who can make inquiries. If somebody had to come down here, why didn't you send Wiggins?" "It's no good being a loner, Jury. A policeman's got to be part of the team. You know my policy is 2 men on an inquiry. How the bloody hell would the country get on if the PM went hightailing it all over the place instead of sending one of her underlings?" "I didn't know you held me in such high esteem, sir." Racer spat out a shred of tobacco. "Very funny. That's not what I mean. But you do put yourself about, don't you? Too bad you haven't more ambition." Jury suspected what was prompting this talk of ambition. "Has the subject of my promotion come up again?" "The Assistant Commissioner did mention it, yes." Jury did not even bother to smile. When Racer rose from his desk, his thumbs locked in the little pockets of his chest, Jury knew it was lecture time. The summing up. Jury's whole career laid out in little, presented in Racer's florid and cliché-ridden style. It was an annual ritual, some years semi-annual, this talk of Jury's career. Since the Assistant Commissioner was always bringing up Jury's future, Racer had to keep finding fresh reasons for denying it. His fingers made little circles in the air. "So I'd appreciate a report in. You just pick up the phone and dial. Simple. You won't get far as superintendent if you can't play on the team, Jury." Victor Merchant sat in vest and suspenders, alternately scratching his stomach and his dog as if one were an extension of the other. He was deep into a racing form. Fanny Merchant sat squarely in the centre of the couch. The parlour on Ebury Street was like Victor, overstuffed. The pieces ran from the worst of period to the worst of modern, and Mrs. Merchant was a bric-a-brac person, too, the sentimental relics of a lifetime spilled onto tables and desks.
"You were asking, Inspector, about my sister's boy. Olive was here just before Christmas. Carries a cross like a true Christian."
Jury's makeshift excuse for being here at all was that he needed additional information about Olive Manning's son, Leo, and any interest in Olive was purely peripheral. Victor Merchant looked up from his racing form. "Ain't she always here round Christmas?"
"Just you never mind, Vic, when I look at some of your family."
"Well, they ain't bleeding liver here on the cheap, are they, my girl? And where's my tea?"
"Be a bit patient, can't you?" "You were just saying,"
Inspector?
Your sister's son is in an institution? Before the poor woman could answer, her husband cut in.
Mental. Daft, that one is.
He drew a circle around a spot on his head and snorted.
That's unkind, Vic.
To Jury, she said,
Tragic it was. Terrible expensive, the place is, but you'd have it no other way.
That was Vic's cue to cut in again.
Oh, that lolly, she comes along here to live off us. Snooty she is to me. Why, I'd like to know? She's only the bleeding housekeeper, isn't she?
His wife shook her head.
That's no cause to be nasty to her. As much grief as she's got. Grief? I'll show you grief, my girl.
Before Victor could begin on his downward path into self-pity, Jury said, Nothing happened while Mrs. Manning was here to upset her, did it? Or make a change in her behaviour?
Oh, yes. There was something. It was after that phone call. You remember, Vic, you answered once. That was the second one.
She reached over and flicked the paper with her fingernail to get his attention.
What phone call was that, Fanny?
She turned to Jury.
It was some woman called. I didn't recognise the voice, and I was surprised someone would be asking for Olive. At first I thought it was the hospital, but I knew it wasn't from the way she acted. Took the phone into another room after a bit and closed the door. All keyed up, Olive was, after. For 2 weeks she was like that. And she started going out then. Not to the hospital, for I usually went with her when she went there. She went somewhere else, and every day, more or less at the same time, wouldn't let me come along.
You said there were 2 phone calls.
That's right. Vic answered the second one. He just said it was someone rigging up Olive, and what did Olive think this was, a B&B or something, expecting him to answer the telephone and all.
Victor Merchant held up the bottle, which had all the while been resting in his lap, and poured himself another drink.
Bleeding hotel, she thought this place was. Bleeding hotel.
Then his expression changed. He looked surprised into cleverness.
That was it, then, an hotel. It was somebody calling from an hotel, because when I said Olive ain't here, she said to tell her to call the Surrey Hotel.
His wife clucked her tongue.
You never told me, Vic. You never asked, did ya?
And he drank off his whiskey. The door to the George swished open, and Melrose Plant walked in, searching the crowd, saw Jury, and pushed his way through what was quite a crush. Jury kicked out a chair. Sit down, Mr. Plant. I thank you for the picture. Come on now, how'd you do it?
Give Scotland Yard my methods? Why on earth should I do that? I'm forgetting a drink. Want another of those?
Plant pointed at Jury's glass with his silver-knobbed stick. Don't mind if I do. You can buy. Back with the drinks, Melrose sat down and launched into an account of his day.
We know Julian Crail knew her then. But which one did he know? I mean, which one was she?
Gemma Temple, Mr. Plant. She drove up to Rackmoor in her roommate's car because her own had learner's plates. Gemma Temple was only just learning how to drive.
And Dilys March was always driving that red car, for God's sake.
Jury nodded, and they were both silent, looking into their beer. Jury leaned back. The way I read it is that Julian Crail saw Gemma Temple somewhere, and was overwhelmed by her resemblance to Dilys March. I believe Dilys meant far more to Julian than he ever admitted. So he and Gemma became lovers. Gemma saw a way to cut in on a fortune. He must have told her a great deal about himself, his family, his home, and Olive Manning. I think he was about to ditch Gemma, perhaps seeing how threadbare this fantasy was he was living. So Gemma got in touch with Olive, and they worked out this little swindle.
Wait a minute, Inspector. Olive Manning denied right from the beginning the woman was Dilys March. It doesn't make sense if she wanted the Colonel to believe Dilys had come back.
True. All I know is that she and Gemma were in the thing together. And if the thieves fell out, that's a damn good reason for murder.
There's a better, isn't there? Julian Crail's?
I know he's your favourite suspect, Mr. Plant, but why would he murder her? Why not instead just tell his father the whole story? And don't forget that alibi of his. Melrose glared at Jury.
You don't want him to be guilty.
Plant's statement cut through his thoughts. Angry with himself, Jury finished off his pint quickly. It's nearly 7. We better be pushing off. It's a 6-hour drive back to Rackmoor. I'd certainly like a word with Olive Manning. Plant's look was like an arrow. Yes, I heard what you said. Whether I want or don't want someone to be guilty is beside the point. Remember, though, Crail has an alibi. Plant still sat there, now sighting down the length of his walking stick. Is that all? Alibis have had holes punched in them before. Plant had excused himself discreetly and gone to his room, and Wood, unable to hide his surprise at the request, had gone to summon Mrs. Manning. Everyone else in the house seemed to be asleep, for which Jury was just as glad. He wanted to create as little stir as possible. Olive Manning appeared. In her bathrobe, and without her keys, Olive Manning looked somewhat more human, nor was she, Jury found to his relief, going to waste any time. Fanny always did talk too much. How did Gemma Temple manage to find you, Mrs. Manning? Through Julian, of course. He was extremely indiscreet. However, the whole thing worked to my advantage. Would have, I should say, had someone not killed the woman. Someone? Not you, Mrs. Manning? Decidedly not I. Although it will be difficult to convince you of that, I'm sure. Your connection with Gemma Temple would certainly point in that direction. But let's back up. How did Gemma Temple know you were visiting your sister? She called here first. Wood, or someone, told her I was visiting in London. She rang up there, told me she had something of great importance to impart about Dilys March. She was at the Surrey Hotel. Julian had just left that morning, I later found out. When I saw her, the resemblance was absolutely uncanny. The woman was at least smart enough to know that the information she had about Dilys, about the past at Old House, simply wouldn't stand up to close scrutiny. She needed some smoothing out if she were to pass herself off as Dilys. So you went along and did the smoothing? Yes, Inspector. How could you hope to get this by Julian? He would never have allowed the woman to live here, impersonating his cousin. Live here? Good Lord, neither would I. She was to collect the 50,000, and we were to divide it. Why would Julian allow it? Allow might not be precisely the term, you know. Could he have convinced the Colonel she wasn't Dilys March? Gemma could have matched any story Julian might have told his father. Why not go the simpler route of blackmailing Julian, then? She smiled slightly. Poetic justice, you see. Dilys March was allowed by the Crails to ruin my son. I thought I deserved to see her make Julian squirm. A tender woman, thought Jury. At first you denied the possibility of her being Dilys. Was that to give added weight to your opinion when you finally came round to saying that perhaps she could be, after all? Precisely, Inspector. I thought I shouldn't be too easily convinced at the outset. There was a long silence. She sighed. Well, before you set the dogs on me, I would like to make a bargain with you. What sort of bargain, Mrs. Manning? You see, I'm admitting rather freely to fraud, I suppose you'd call it, and I'll give you no trouble on that score. However, I feel I've a right to try and clear my name of murder. I can't do that if you take me away. Jury smiled. It's up to us to do that. Clear you, that is, if it can be done. She shook her head. There would be no assurance of success. All I want, Inspector, is some 4 or 5 hours' time. There's a hunt tomorrow. I should say this morning. If you could allow me some freedom of movement, only till then. In 4 or 5 hours you could be far away from here. She interrupted. Oh, come on now, Inspector. I've no place I want to go. I've no life apart from Old House and my son. And how could I ever see him again if I should scarper? What is it you intend to do, Mrs. Manning? In this bargain, what will be my reward if I allow you those hours? I think perhaps I can flush a fox out of covert for you, Inspector. Tomorrow, as the Colonel is fond of saying, we get out the old red rag. At 8:30 a.m., Melrose Plant, breakfastless, with only a draught from a mind-numbing stirrup cup to sustain body and soul, was picking himself up off the ground. He had already taken one fall half an hour ago, when his mount just barely missed clearing a wall. Now it had gone down jumping a beck, and he was dusting himself off and remounting. He surveyed what part of the field he could see. Pinks and Melton coats, derbies, velvet caps on the women, stocks, bone boots, jeans and sweaters, a motley crew, all apparently having a spanking good time out here on this heathen moor in the wet and the fog and the snow. The grey he was riding was enamoured of it all, even if Melrose wasn't, and when hounds started throwing tongue, it set off again at a fresh gallop. When there was a clear patch in the fog, he made out a cluster of horses and riders, all halted at a long stone wall. He assumed the colonel had found, and was just as glad of it. Now maybe they could go back and eat and be civilized. He broke his horse's gallop, trotted up, and dismounted where 10 or a dozen riders were doing the same. The wall before them seemed to jut up out of the mist, a purposeless boundary for all Melrose could see. Hounds were rioting, and that didn't mean a find even to his untuned ear. Colonel Crail seemed to be warning them off. Dear God, Melrose thought, when finally he saw her. Olive Manning was lying across the wall, face down like a huge rag doll, her legs hanging down one side, arms straight out and down the other. Blood was everywhere, running down the stone, staining the snow, smeared on breeches, black Melton coat, boots. It was as if she had tried, before she died, to hoist herself up and off the murderous stones. The fence would have made any horse and rider refuse it, and look for a gate or any other way through it. It was not its height, but the fact that it was coped with knife-edged pieces of limestone, laid transversely. It would be like falling on spikes. Melrose turned to no one in particular. "Get jury." The police pathologist, Dr. Dudley, wiped his hands and shook his head. "Clever, but it couldn't have happened." "That's what I thought," said Jury, watching policemen feather out much like hounds, spreading thin all along the stone wall. They were combing everything, ground, cracks, snow, for evidence. Inspector Harkins stood in his sheepskin-lined coat, smoking. He ran his hand across the stones. "Clever is right. I shouldn't like to fall on that, not at all." The doctor was packing up his bag. "Fall on it? But it won't kill you, though it'd do a bit of damage. Those stones will lacerate, but they can't go through you like a row of knives. The wounds weren't made by the stones, that's all." Jury looked at Dudley. "I'm afraid to ask." "Same thing, I'd say, as was used on the Temple woman." Harkins snorted. "And since we still don't know what that was—" He went over to the spot where Olive Manning's horse had been found. "So someone stabbed her, threw her over this wall to make it look as if the horse had thrown her, and then rode off. Clever, very. Except the someone was not so clever about the horse. It was standing on the wrong side of the fence." The doctor snapped his bag shut. "It would have happened about 4 or 5 hours ago." Jury stared at the body. "Just before the hunt, then. It began around 7 or 7:30, I understand." Harkins looked round at the cold, bleak moor. "Hellish hour, and a hellish spot to meet someone." "Yes, but I guess we know why it was chosen," said Jury. All across the grounds of Old House were scattered horse-carts, caravans, vans, trucks, cars, Land Rovers. Jury walked across the court, past the steaming horses, the men and women collected there in better or worse spirits, probably depending on how much of the stirrup cup they'd imbibed. Jury was starting up the stair when he heard a voice behind him. "Inspector Jury, I've brought you something." Lily Siddons sat atop her chestnut mare and looked simply smashing. She was a far cry from the aproned lass he'd seen in the Bridgewalk Café. Lily was dressed in a velvet jacket of hunter's green. Her cap was off, and her gold hair was blown by a breeze. She was no longer cook's girl. This was her milieu. She looked elegant, composed, secure. She looked, indeed, every inch a Crail. He reached up for the silver cup she was handing down to him. Jury did not drink, just held the cup, as if transfixed. He watched her dismount, and wondered how in hell he could have been so blind. The fragments of Lily Siddons' life flew in his mind into place, like broken bits of a kaleidoscope, to form a design. The Gold Dust twins, Julian and his brother Rolf. Rolf, ladies' man, and seldom the proper lady, whisked off to Italy. And Mary Siddons' suicide. The Gold Dust twins. that incredible hair, which he'd noticed the first night when she stood with the light behind her. Lady Margaret's hair, passed on to Lily Siddons, Colonel Crail's granddaughter. In the Bracewood room, Julian sat on the couch opposite Jury. "Cigarette, Mr. Crail?" Julian shook his head, got up. "I could use a drink, though. You?" "Why not? Just a small one, though." Considering all the loneliness which Julian must have been living with all these years, and the pain he was about to endure, Jury couldn't stick at making him drink alone, too. "Did you see Olive Manning this morning, Mr. Crail?" Julian splashed whiskey in 2 glasses, adding soda to his. "No." "I wanted to ask you about Dilys March." "For the 100th time, that woman was not Dilys March." Jury took a sip of his whiskey. "I know. She was brought here to masquerade as Dilys by Olive Manning." There was a long silence, broken only by a log disintegrating and sparking in the fireplace. "So you know all about it?" Out of his pocket, Jury took the small picture which Melrose had found. Julian looked at it for a long while. "Stupid of me. Stupid to keep the pictures. I suppose that ties it all up for you, doesn't it?" "No. Was it in London you met her?" "Victoria Station. I'd taken the train down. Last year it was. I went into the cafe for a cup of tea, and there she was, eating a bun, drinking a cup of tea. I couldn't believe it. To see this girl sitting there, who could have been Dilys. I'm not used to approaching women, really, but I screw up my nerve and managed it." "So you knew Gemma Temple for upwards of a year? All of those trips to London?" Julian flushed. "An unwise, a dangerous liaison, obviously, but I couldn't help myself. It was like getting something back. When Mother and Rolf and then even Dilys went, I felt robbed, as if this house had been ransacked and everything taken. I can't explain it. But seeing her, it was like having things in the right place again." "Your earlier statement, Mr. Crail, that you disliked Dilys, I take it was not precisely true." Julian turned his head and smiled slightly. "And not precisely a lie, either. She was fascinating, Dilys was, but not nice at all. She would have loved today. She would have loved the hunt and the kill at the end, if I might speak metaphorically. Even at 16, even at 14, she had men and plenty of them." "You told Gemma Temple a great deal about yourself, didn't you, Mr. Crail?" "Yes, a great deal." "Tell me what happened after the Temple woman got here." "The first I knew of it was when I walked in here. They were in this room. My father, Gemma, Olive Manning. I opened the door and found myself staring straight into her eyes. This woman I'd left, for the last time, I thought, amidst rather much tears and yelling because I wouldn't marry her. Here she was. And she smiled. I think every word of that afternoon is etched into my mind with acid. 'Hello, Julian,' she said. 'What in the hell are you doing here?' I said to her. 'I don't wonder you're shocked,' my father said. 'I couldn't believe it either. She's come back, Dilys has.'" Julian closed his eyes. I almost blurted it out then and there, but something in her eyes stopped me. The whole ruddy situation was so impossible I had to laugh. The idea she could pass herself off as Dilys. "You killed her, didn't you?" Wearily, Julian turned his head to regard Jury. "No. But I know you won't believe me." Jury interrupted. "Not Gemma Temple. Dilys March." "How in hell did you figure that out?" "I suspected it for some time. Dilys didn't sound like the sort of person to walk away from a lot of money, but you just told me yourself a few minutes ago." "How?" "That account of your meeting at Victoria. After all, Dilys was supposed to have run away to London. That's where her car was found. Why didn't you assume this young lady, this dead ringer, was Dilys?" "Because you knew she was dead." "Christ," breathed Julian. Jury picked up his glass, mixed him another whiskey and soda, and brought the drink back. "Go on, tell me." Julian accepted the drink. That business with Leo Manning is what brought it all to a head. He was a proper mess, poor fellow. Just the sort of psyche Dilys would consider a challenge and love to mess about with, like sculptor's clay. Well, they were lovers. There was a summer house near the cliffs where they used to meet. That's where they were that night. I was looking for her. I saw a dim light in the summer house, so I went a bit farther along the cliff path and looked in. There she was, stark. I thought she'd been only teasing him. I didn't really think... You can imagine what it did to me. That expression, seeing red, is absolutely true. So I waited. Finally she came out of the summer house, walking along the path to the main house. I can still hear her footsteps coming up the gravel, and she humming some stupid song, as if nothing had happened, when for me everything had. I stepped across her path, started screaming at her. Dilys only laughed. And then she told me in the most graphic detail possible everything they'd done over the year in all of their meetings. The ironic thing was that she was wearing this cloak that reached to the ground, hooded, and it gave her the look of a religious. I picked up a rock, the nearest thing to hand, and crushed her skull with it. She crumpled. I stood there looking down at her for the longest time. I think I expected her to get up, just get up, and dust herself off and laugh. I felt I had to get her out of there. It wasn't fear. At least, not then. It was that I had to get her out of my sight, out of my mind. It was from myself I wanted to hide her, more than from anyone else, more even than from the police. I wasn't even thinking of police. Below the cliff path at one point, there was a place sort of back beneath the rocks with a hell of an undertow. She'd disappear. The body would never be found. I just shoved her over. I ran back to the house, went up to her room, threw some of her clothes in a suitcase, and grabbed another one of those capes she liked so much. It covered me completely. When Olive looked out of her window, of course she thought it was Dilys getting into the car. I drove the car to that lot above Rackmore, parked it there, one car among many. Then I walked back. No one saw me. The next day, naturally, there was some upset about Dilys tearing off, but then Dilys did it often. I said I thought I'd motor to York for the day. I drove my car to the parking lot, picked up Dilys's, drove it to London, and left it there, abandoned it. Julian looked up at Jury. Believe me, I know how it sounds. Very cold-blooded, all planned out. The cloak, the car, the trip. But it wasn't then. Oh, Christ, I don't know how to explain it. Jury got up again, took his empty glass, splashed whiskey in it. You did a pretty good job, I'd say. There was another long silence, and in the dim light, Jury could make out the tear tracing its slow way down Julian's face. Jury looked toward the fog, implacable beyond the windows, moving and shifting as if it might find its proper form and give some ghostly knock.
Vampire bats!
Bertie yelled, swooping through the kitchen, an old quilt upraised above his head, his elbows beating in and out. He shrilled in a high, piercing treble, a sound he thought a bat might make. Bertie started walking on tiptoe, fluttering the quilt.
They suck blood, that's what they do, old Arnold.
His teeth were stuck out over his lower lip, making vampire teeth. Bertie's screeching laugh would have raised the hackles of any other dog. Arnold yawned. Sighing, Bertie threw off the quilt and inspected his burned bacon rashers. They would have to settle for toast. He pronged the bread with a toasting fork.
Anyway, it's what it sounded like to me. A bunch of holes in her. She must have looked like a sieve.
He held the toast over the fire and turned it carefully, then stuck it out for Arnold's inspection. He hummed a little and thought.
I guess the holes was too big, though, and too far apart.
He turned the bread and hummed some more while it toasted to a golden brown. Then he took that piece from the fork and started to prong another. He stopped and looked at the fork itself. Prongs.
Whatever it was, only made 2 holes, didn't it, Arnold?
Suddenly Bertie's eyes widened.
Arnold!
Arnold, who had been scratching under his collar, tensed. Bertie's tone suggested something worth attending to, as if a cat had sprung to the sill outside.
Arnold!
The swallowtail!
Melrose Plant and Sir Titus Crail were in the Bracewood room that evening having drinks. Julian was nowhere to be seen, out for a walk perhaps, and Melrose was just as glad of it. He was almost beginning to feel sorry for him. Julian's responses since the morning interview with Jury had been especially lethargic. He seemed merely waiting for his life to wind up. Melrose was called back from these reflections by the voice of Colonel Crail.
"I'm sorry, my boy. You walked into all of this trouble."
Melrose went a little red. He was thinking of what hand he had had in all this trouble.
"It's I who should apologize, Sir Titus, for bothering you with my presence in the middle of it."
The Colonel made clucking sounds, waving the words away.
"Let's talk of something else, shall we?"
He reached over and shook the red coat, which he had hung across a chair, and turned to the fire. Melrose wondered why he didn't have the servants perform this homely task of drying out the damp cloth. Maybe it was a small ritual the Colonel enjoyed doing himself. Sir Titus said something about a small hole in the worn sleeve. He clucked sympathetically, as if the coat would understand.
"The old red rag. I'll have to send it along to the tailor in Jermyn Street. I'll have to make do with a swallowtail for a while, though the master doesn't ordinarily wear one. I will. No sense standing on ceremony these days."
Melrose shook his head, his mind not on hunting, but on the torn body of Olive Manning.
"Swallowtail?"
Melrose suddenly looked at the Colonel.
"I beg your pardon?" "Colonel Crail, you said swallowtail." "Why, yes. The coat I use when—"
But the Colonel broke off, because Melrose Plant had shot out of his chair, spilling his drink, and then nearly run from the room. The grey, brindled cat, face besotted with sleep, sat like a lump in the window of the gallery. Jury assumed Reese was there and opened the door. He let out, "Hello, anyone here?" And soon a clattering of boots came from the back stair. Adrian appeared in his paint-blobbed apron. The black hair falling over his forehead seemed slightly matted. He wiped it back with his arm, his hand still clutching a camel-hair brush.
"Inspector, come on upstairs."
Adrian flung back the cover from the canvas in the corner of the room, the picture he had been working on.
"Done from memory, of course, but true, I think, to detail. And mood, I hope. Like it?"
Jury was stunned. The figure seemed shrouded not so much by the black cape as by night and fog. The tendrils of it wrapped around the woman. She was stiffly posed as if she had sat for the portrait, and Jury imagined it was not precisely as she had appeared to Adrian on the night of the 12th. The form was elongated, long-limbed, the face black-masked and rather frightening. The left side glimmered ghost-like, the right side was black and almost disappeared into the dark background. Fog made a silver aureole around the street lamp.
"It's remarkable. Only I wish you'd finished it before."
Adrian was rooting through a jar of brushes. He threw them down and turned.
"Good God, Philistines! All you can think of is murder."
"It does rather occupy my time, yes. Your painting is a hell of a lot better than an identikit, if this is really what you saw."
"I'm an artist, remember? Observation is my business."
The bell tinkled downstairs. Adrian looked at the floor, surprised.
"Surely it can't be a customer. I've forgotten what they look like. It can't be you. You're here. Someone must have got lost in the fog."
Adrian took a swipe at straightening his hair and went downstairs. All Jury heard from below were muted voices. He was still absorbed in the picture. He frowned. Something was wrong. An image, obscure, opaque, floated in his mind. A face in a wave, a reflection in a pool. His mind jumped back to watching himself in front of the mirror in the Old Fox Deceiv'd. Adrian yelled up the stairs.
"Inspector Jury! Come on down, you've got a visitor!"
Carefully he replaced the canvas on the easel, the image lost to him again. But something was still wrong. Of all the people Jury hadn't expected to see, it was the roof thatcher, Percy Blythe. He was wadding his knitted cap in his hands and darting quicksilver glances at the paintings on the walls.
"Hello, Percy. You wanted me?" "I do. It's Bertie. The bairn's been in me here, thieving."
"Bertie?
Oh, surely not. Seen him with me own eyes, coming up Dagger Alley. I was, and I seen him and Arnold coming out of my home. I hung back in shadows."
But weren't they just visiting, Percy? They go in when you're—" Seeing him shake his head, Jury stopped.
"Not going in, I mind, but coming out. Ah, and so sly they was, slipping along like two eels with murder weapon."
Jury shot him a glance.
"What? Murder weapon, lad? What her was done killed with? I could have told you what killed her as soon as I nosed 'twas puncture wounds."
Bertie did not like coming this way, even in full daylight, certainly not at night. He held the swallowtail prong down and stepped carefully. He didn't want it putting his eye out, in case he stumbled, which was a likelihood in the sea roke and on this boggy ground. A couple of times he nearly fell. He was making his way to that part of the cliff between Old House and the sea wall, where there was a place, according to Percy Blythe, where you could send anything over and it wouldn't be seen again. That's where he intended to throw the swallowtail. Of course he knew Percy hadn't had anything to do with the murder, but that wasn't to say the police wouldn't think so if they found this thing in his cottage. Someone must have walked in and taken it, and then put it back. Something hard hit Bertie's foot, a root, he supposed, and he nearly fell again.
"Come along, Arnold."
He didn't have to tell Arnold to come along, since Arnold was glued to his side. It was more to hear the sound of his voice than anything else. To make sure Arnold wouldn't lag, he had a finger hooked in his collar. He heard the Whitby bull. In this silence, it sounded as if the horn were right by his ear. Perhaps he was getting near the sea. So that he would have a free hand to search the fog before him, he put the swallowtail in the coat of his slicker. The torch he had was almost useless, its dim yellow glow more frightening than helpful, for it pointed up branches with skeletal arms, bushes like crouching beasts. Now Bertie could hear the sucking sound of the waves, and he walked on a bit faster. When he could hear the waves collapse not far off, he was relieved. Soon he would be rid— Something moved. Bertie swung around.
"Who's there?"
But among the wind-whipped branches and in the mist, it was difficult to tell what was stationary, what was not. Arnold growled, low and soft, as if lit by Bertie's own imagination, and then they turned and started again toward the cliff's edge. Something was coming up behind him. There was no doubt this time that he heard steps, or something ploughing through the undergrowth. Arnold growled again, deep in his throat. There was a rushing sound through the undergrowth, like wind sweeping down a corridor. Arnold was barking in earnest now, and Bertie's scalp prickled with fear. A bright light suddenly shone in his face. Bertie flung up his arm, but not before a hand reached out and knocked off his glasses. Arnold was barking furiously. Bertie could just make him out, rushing at the dark blur. Someone was after the swallowtail. He was sure of it. Bertie heard more rushing and scuffling, and Arnold's barking was near hysterical, and it was like two dogs going at each other's throats. He was afraid to move without his glasses. Without his glasses he couldn't see anything clearly, and he knew he was near the cliff's edge, for he could hear the heavy crash of the waves beneath him. He knew how near he was when hands shoved him over. It was a thatching tool, Percy Blythe told Jury, once they were inside his cottage. He pointed to the wall where the other tools were hung and labelled. The swallowtail was missing.
"It goes in me home to get out or summat. I never mind. But what did Bertie and Arnold want in the sand for?"
He described it to Jury as about 1.5 feet long, pronged, and the prongs as sharp as you wanted to make them. Jury asked him who knew about it, and he said everyone. Yes, even the Crailes. No, he never locked his door, and Dark Street was empty this time of year. Anyone could have come along. Despite the warmth of the little cottage, Jury felt something very cold move down his spine. Bertie was walking around with what was probably the murder weapon. The drop might have been a few seconds or a few hours. All sense of time was lost to Bertie in the black pool of his mind. His hands had found something against the cliffside, something like a thick stub. He couldn't see it. It might have been an old root, but it was stationary enough to hang on to. The trouble was he couldn't get any purchase with his feet, scrabble as he might against the rock. So in the few moments he had hung there, his arms had already tired. His eyes were screwed shut. What good were his eyes anyway? His arms felt pulled from their sockets nearly.
"Holy Mary, Mother of God!"
Then he heard a scrabbling, a sound drawing nearer, and laboured breathing. There was that familiar wet fur smell. He pasted his face against the rock, crying. At least Arnold hadn't been made a sieve out of, too. And then, miraculously, he felt something beneath his feet. He was being buoyed up, just a little, just enough to take the hideous weight off his arms. It moved under him, and he could hear Arnold panting hard. Arnold, who knew the little narrow paths on these cliffs and could maneuver them like a mountain goat. Somewhere between hanging and standing, Bertie shoved his face against the rocks, moulded his body to the cold, hard cliff, as if it were indeed some soft, human form. What her mum might have been if she hadn't gone off. And he forgot about blessing the Holy Mother, the angel Gabriel, the stars, the sun, the moon. He just blessed Arnold. A rock, a clod of earth, something loosened and fell down the cliffside, and Arnold's weight shifted a fraction. Bertie could hear the nails of his paws rasping across the stone, and was sure they were both going over the side. Bertie pressed against the wet rocks and used the root to try and draw himself up a bit, to take the weight off Arnold's back. Arnold barked. Bertie took that as a sign he had steadied himself, and he brought his feet down again, through that 1 inch of space, and rested them on Arnold's back. But then he heard a different sound, which came from above. There was a scraping along earth and rock, and he realized that someone was making his way down, the same way he had heard Arnold coming. Relief swept over him in a warm wave. Someone had heard Arnold barking. Someone was coming to the rescue. Or was someone coming back to finish the job? His blood had barely had time to freeze when he heard a voice very close to him. "Give me a hand." The voice was unfamiliar and cold. Bertie sensed, rather than saw, an arm outreached towards him. Whoever it was could come no closer. Whoever it was could not have had much room to stand, nor a very good foothold either. "Give me your hand." The voice stabbed into him, and the terror he felt toward the cliffside turned round in him, and he clung to it now as if it were his mother's own body. And then Arnold moved out from under him. Bertie shot his hand out toward the voice, toward the other's breathing, aware only of that one more moment of life before the hand which had closed around his would drop him into the darkness forever. But then he heard other sounds coming from above him, voices, hounds. For one crazy moment, as the hand grasping his swung him down from his perch, and another arm grabbed him round his shoulders, he wondered if the bloody fools were out riding to hounds. "Bertie!" That voice came from the top of the cliff, and he knew it. It was Inspector Jury. He was being dragged upwards, hard going by the sound of the turbid figure beside him. With one final lurch, he was swung up by his arm, set finally and firmly on solid ground. Bertie could see nothing but vague lights and amorphous shapes, moving dream-wise across his vision, but he wasn't thinking of them. "Arnold!" The terrier barked, and Bertie dropped on his knees and threw his arms around the dog's wet fur. Someone was beside him, wiping the boy's face with a handkerchief. It was Inspector Jury. "Bertie, old chap, look, we found your glasses." He positioned them on Bertie's nose. The scene sprang to life, as if someone had raised a curtain. Jury was speaking to someone behind Bertie. "It's a good thing you were out here." Bertie turned to see Julian Crail, standing behind him. Julian stood just beyond the rim of light thrown by the electric torches. He was wiping his hands with a handkerchief. Across his shirt sleeve was a large tear. Inspector Harkins stepped forward. "Quite a coincidence. I think we'd better go back to the house and talk." Julian said nothing. As if the bitter pill were his own, Jury swallowed. It would be hard to take, to be accused of trying to kill the person you'd just saved. "I'm taking Bertie home, Harkins." "But we need to question the boy." "I can do that once he's home, not here." Harkins turned away in disgust, and Jury pulled Wiggins aside. "Go with them to Old House and see Harkins doesn't lynch Julian Crail, and then come along to Bertie's cottage." Bertie broke from Jury's grasp. "Mr. Crail!" Bertie ran up to Julian and threw his arms around his waist, as if Julian too were covered with rich, damp fur. When he let go, Julian sketched a small salute in the air. "Any time, sport." Arnold barked, and his tail swished once like a whip. Close as he'll ever come to wagging it, thought Jury. Now they were all crowded round the oilcloth kitchen table in Bertie's cottage. Jury, Bertie, Melrose, Wiggins, and Arnold. Bertie had been over it and over it as they'd filled him with tea and toast fingers. No, he'd seen nought. No, he had heard nought. No, he'd smelled nought to give him a clue as to who had pushed him.
There must be something, Bertie.
Well, but there ain't,
Jury persisted. Someone followed you up there. Whoever it was must have thought you were going to take that thatching tool to Old House or to the police, and that you'd seen who'd taken it from Percy's cottage.
But I didn't, did I?
The murderer didn't know that. Why else would you have taken it?
To keep Percy from getting in trouble.
Wiggins mumbled through a mouthful of toast.
That's very loyal of you, but it's tampering with evidence, lad.
Bertie went a shade paler.
What'll they do to me?
Melrose shifted uncomfortably on his stool.
Oh, give you a medal, probably.
I just missed being on the spot with the goods again. I think I'd best retire from the force. Jury smiled and drank his tea. I'm the one who should retire. Didn't even think of Percy's tools.
Well, you weren't studying them like I was that night.
Bertie gave Melrose a look.
It's old Arnold who deserves the medal. But I know who it wasn't, I can tell you. That Inspector Harkin's daft. It wasn't Mr. Crail.
Melrose stopped in the act of lighting his cigar.
You mean because he crawled down there and then lugged you up? That, of course, would be most commendable, had he not shoved you over in the first place. Hearing all of us up there, he would hardly let you drop then.
It's because of Arnold.
I must be dim, said Jury. Explain that.
Arnold moved. When Mr. Crail told me to let go, Arnold stopped barking and he moved out from under me. I had to let go then. Didn't have no choice, did I? You don't think he'd have done that if he'd been the same person that went for me and him with the swallowtail, do you? You don't think Arnold's dim, do you?
Melrose opened the morning paper and searched for the crossword.
Decidedly not.
Bertie's got a point there, said Jury.
But you can't always depend on a dog, can you, sir?
Jury looked at Wiggins to see if he were joking, but Wiggins' expression as he spooned sugar into his tea was almost holy in its seriousness. Bertie turned to Wiggins.
You can on Arnold. Smartest dog I ever did see. He can play Simon Says.
How jolly,
said Melrose, trying to figure out a 6-letter word for obfuscate.
Just watch, Arnold. Simon says, do this.
Bertie jumped down from his chair. Arnold imitated the movement, rearing up on his hind quarters.
See?
Then to Arnold.
Arnold, Simon says, do this.
Gleefully, Bertie clapped his hand over one side of his face. Arnold raised his paw up to his eye.
Oh, come on, Arnold.
Melrose was fascinated in spite of himself.
Well, he did it, didn't he?
With a deprecating gesture, Bertie said,
'Twas the wrong side.
Melrose clapped his own hand against his brow.
For heaven's sake, you can't expect Arnold to figure out a mirror image, can you?
Bertie was all nonchalance.
The dog should have knowed.
Jury stared. Like a petrel, splitting the water and ascending with his treasured catch, that elusive image at the bottom of the well of Jury's mind swam upward. An image of himself in the mirror, changing a handkerchief from one side to the other. Another image, Adrian Rees. That picture. Yes, everyone had made the same mistake, and he had been the biggest fool of all. They were all looking at him. Without even realizing it, he had stood up.
I've got a call to make. Wiggins, I want you to meet me at Adrian Rees's place in about 15 minutes. Finish your breakfast.
Melrose returned to the crossword puzzle. Perhaps it was frivolous, but he was done with detection, so he might as well return to a pastime to which he seemed more suited. One could play music on her name, a Shakespearean character, 5 down. He chewed the pencil. Play music. Piano. No, Shakespeare never named anyone Piano. At this rate, he would not finish in under 15 minutes, his usual time. Oh, for God's sake, he thought. Viola, from Twelfth Night. Propitious, all things considered. Viola and Sebastian, twins. His mind started clicking over. For the next 15 minutes he thought about it, and finally turned to Bertie.
May I borrow Arnold?
The bell tinkled at the gallery, and Jury walked in. Adrian Reese appeared, the dim yellow light of the kitchen silhouetting him in the doorway. "Ah, Inspector, what's the matter?" "I'd like to see that painting again, the one you did of the temple woman." Adrian led Jury upstairs. The oil stood on the easel. "Are you sure this is the way she looked?" "You keep asking me that. Yes, yes, and again, yes." Jury stared at the painting. It wasn't Gemma Temple. Jury turned and walked downstairs, leaving Adrian to stare open-mouthed at the empty stairwell, then back at the picture. Melrose Plant was leaning against the wall of the Bridgewalk Cafe, smoking, when Jury and Wiggins walked up. He pointed to the tiny sign in the glass. Closed. "It opens at 10. We've got a few minutes to go." Arnold, on a leash? Jury couldn't believe it. "What the hell are you doing here? And with Arnold? Thought you'd never ask." "Oh, it's so nice to get someplace before you do. Shall I launch into a long, tedious, though somewhat brilliant explanation now, or shouldn't we wait for a demonstration? But I see by the stony look on your face it should be now. Very well. Arnold?" The window shade in the door snapped up. Lily peered out, smiling. She opened the door, and then her eye fell on Arnold. Arnold's eye fell, too, on Lily. Arnold growled. It was not loud. It was steady and dangerous. Lily took a step backward. She tried to laugh. "What on earth? Whatever's the matter with Arnold?" Melrose looked at Jury, and Jury nodded. Melrose tugged a little at the leash, but Arnold stood square, adamantine, unyielding. Now Jury knew the reason for the leash. Melrose tugged at it. "Come along, old bean." At first there was no movement from Arnold, and then the terrier, with more self-control than Jury had ever witnessed in a human being, turned at Melrose's next tug and trotted off beside him down Bridge Walk. Lily had started to close the door, but Wiggins put his foot in it. Lily stood stalk straight, her face chalky. Jury was formal. "Your name is Lily Siddons? We're here to arrest you for the murders of Gemma Temple, Olive Manning, and the attempted murder of Bertie Makepeace. I must warn you that anything you say may be taken down and used in evidence against you in a court of law." For a moment, the whole room seemed white with her silence. Then she laughed. "And who's going to be your chief witness, Inspector? That dog? You seem to forget that someone's been trying to kill me." That was the cleverest part, to put yourself in the position of intended victim. But we only had your word for it, didn't we? Lily smiled with unnerving serenity. "I had no motive, did I? To say nothing of opportunity." "You had the best motive of all. As Colonel Crail's granddaughter, you'd have got millions." "That's absurd," Jury went on. "How long have you known it?" "Not long, I'd say. And Olive Manning knew it. She was Lady Margaret's confidant. Your mother killed herself over Rolf Crail, didn't she? Rolf going off like that, letting himself be spirited away to Italy." "Damn them to hell. They drove her to kill herself. And I've as much right to the money, the house, the position, the name. I'm Lily Crail." Jury grabbed her by the shoulders. She stood stock-still beneath his hands, and he thought she'd got back her control until the hand flew up and came down and the nails ripped like tiny knives across his face. Wordlessly, he pushed her into a chair. Jury wadded a handkerchief against his face and went on. "It was easy for you to get the thatching tool from Percy Bligh's cottage. You're friends. You got Olive Manning to meet you by that wall, and you thought Bertie had seen you take the swallowtail, didn't you? You must have sent Gemma Temple a note, something to get her to the Angel's Steps. Did you pretend it was Julian who wanted to meet her? That's why Les Aird saw her coming along the High." Lily's persistent silence was as much of an admission that he was not far off the mark, as if she'd agreed to every word he'd said. "You might as well tell me, Lily. It's all over, you know." "There's no way I could have got from my cottage into the Angel's Steps in just a few minutes. Even you said that." "You weren't in your cottage when she was killed. It wasn't Gemma Temple that Adrian saw in Grape Lane. It was you. Gemma Temple was already dead. You'd killed her between the time Les saw her and the time Adrian saw you walking along Grape Lane." Her face was white. "What do you mean?" "What I said. She was killed before 11:15, not after, as we were all led to believe. Jury leaned toward her, unmindful of the lashing she had just given him. In her face he thought he saw the remnants of Lady Margaret's beauty slipping away. It happened even more quickly than the lash of her nails, the upraised arm and the flying foot of Wiggins, who overturned everything, table, chairs, and Jury himself, in an effort to keep her hand away from Jury's head. And Jury pulled himself off the floor. "My God, where did you learn that?"
"It's karate, sir. Good for the sinuses, I found."
Jury was down on his knee beside Lily, who was lying unconscious on the stone floor. "She must have hit her head. Is there a doctor at all in Rackmoor? See if you can scare one up. I'll stay with her. Have you got an aspirin, Wiggins? My head is killing me." It was the one thing he knew he could always count on, that Sergeant Wiggins would have aspirin.
"Lily?" said Colonel Crail. "Lily? Of all people, you can't be serious."
"I'm sorry, Colonel Crail," Jury said.
"I'd like to see her, if I may."
"No, not now, at least. Not ever, if Jury had anything to do with it. Maybe it would all come out, her relationship to the family, but Jury wasn't going to bring it out now. For the Colonel to discover now, when there wasn't an earthly thing he could do about it, that Lily was his granddaughter, after all the losses the old man had suffered, it was just too much. At least Colonel Crail could take some refuge in the knowledge that Julian was innocent.
"Then Julian... Well, thank God he's no longer in danger."
Julian, who was leaning against the mantel, looked at Jury, gave him a weird little smile. When the Colonel had left the room, Julian turned to Jury. "Unfortunately, I'm not out of danger, am I? But then I never was. I'm glad it's over. You know, Mr. Crail, I don't think the courts are going to be all that hard on you. A 15-year-old? Jury shrugged. He didn't want to say murder. "And you did save Bertie's life." "You sound almost apologetic, Inspector. Bertie's rather a brave lad, isn't he? I'll look in on him. Sometime. If I'm free." Julian tossed his cigarette in the fire, and wordlessly put out his hand. Jury shook it. Wiggins' voice came over the telephone, high-pitched and tight with anxiety.
"I don't know what to say, sir. Oh, my God!"
Jury closed his eyes against the news. "How'd it happen?"
"Lily said she wanted tea, and I said yeah, but I'd have to go with her. Watching her like a hawk, I was, really. I didn't take my eyes off her. We were in the kitchen. She put a pan of water on to boil. I was standing near her by the stove, and before I knew it, she flung it at me, pan, water, the lot."
"Are you okay?"
"It was painful at the time, and it gave her just long enough to bolt. She got out the door and latched it. It was 5 minutes before I could break it open, but by then..."
She was gone. All afternoon they combed the village. Jury recalled the words of Maud Brixenham. Used to be a smuggler's haunt, easy to hide in these twisting little streets. Nothing could have been truer. Streets, alleys, cul-de-sacs, winding up and down and across like fretwork. A dozen or more men had been wandering in and around Rackmoor, questioning, looking. It was Jury's opinion that Lily Siddons was in York by now, or on her way to London. It was nearly dark now. Jury and Harkins were sitting in the Fox Deceiv'd, bolting their food, their first since early morning. "Reese and I made the same mistake," said Jury. "That picture he did showed the left side of her face as white, but Les Aird must have indicated the right side, because he saw Gemma Temple, not Lily. So it was Lily Siddons that Adrian Reese passed in Grape Lane. She made sure someone saw her. She wanted to be certain we thought Gemma Temple was still alive when she knew Kitty would be around to give her an alibi." Harkins clipped the end of a cigar. "I must say, Miss Siddons deserves points for pure damn nerve." Jury smiled. She made up 2 identical costumes. The only thing she couldn't know in advance was which side of her face Gemma Temple would put the white grease paint on, and which side the black. I wouldn't be surprised if it never registered with her, that she made the same mistake I did. They were standing up to leave when Wiggins rushed in to tell them Lily Siddons had been found. At least 24 people, some police, a few villagers, including Bertie, and Melrose Plant was standing near the cliff's edge at almost the exact spot where Bertie had gone over the night before. All were looking down. 2 of Harkin's men, ropes around their waists, were making their slow descent, but the same rock's configuration which had prevented Bertie from getting a toehold prevented their going down farther. Lily Siddons was, or had been, walking along the narrow strands of shingle between Rackmoor and Runner's Bay, the same one her mother must have walked so many years ago. Jury could barely make her out down there, where she stood looking up. The water was already round her ankles, and would soon be up to her knees, and then... She raised her arm. She could have been a bather on holiday, helloing to friends back on shore. Jury tossed off his coat, and was halfway over the edge before anyone knew it, before Wiggins could yell,
My God, you can't get down there!
From all the people assembled at the top of the cliff came screams of protest. Only Bertie's was effective.
Get him, Arnold!
Before Jury had gone another inch, he felt the terrier's mouth close around his forearm. It gave Plant, Harkins, and Wiggins just enough time to drag him back to the top. Jury wiped his hair from his forehead as he looked, dazed, over the edge. What he saw was the collapse of the last wave over Lily's head, and the arm outstretched against the dark waters of winter. She might have been waving goodbye. Later that evening, Jury and Plant strolled up along the seawall to look at the village for the last time. I don't think it was the money, Mr. Plant. I don't think she wanted the money, or the privilege that went with the Crail name. I think she only wanted the family. Plant said nothing, and Jury continued to stare out at the dark waves rolling in. Sometimes I feel it's like, I don't know, a false vocation. And now I'm about to be made superintendent. I feel as if I'm being asked to mete out justice somehow. How do I do that? You look at someone like Julian Crail or someone like Lily, and feel they're as much victims as the rest of us. Yet she's supposed to have done all of this in cold blood. It's not up to me to decide, is it? All I'm supposed to do is collar them and bring them in. Only sometimes I don't bring them in. I wonder about justice. For a moment he was silent, looking out to sea. Wonder about being a superintendent, too. Plant lit up a cigarette and imagined what Les Aird would say. It's cool. And they turned from the sea and walked back into the fogs of Rackmoor.